What's the difference between the rapture and the second coming, Israel and the church? We'll talk about that today on Steel on Steel. Good morning. Welcome to Steel on Steel. I'm John Leffler, and my engineer today is Jeff Peters.
This is CBN Radio News.
The third secret of Fatima. Some people say that there's a conspiracy to cover it up. But then again, what is Fatima? And we'll talk about that today as we match Steel on Steel. And good afternoon. Apologize it's taking so long to come up to speed here. It tends to do this from time to time. I was telling one of our guests here today that I've been on the air for so long in the morning, I always forget to say good afternoon. I still say good morning. It's pure habit. We had a request a couple of weeks ago to begin covering Fatima again. As everyone who listens to Steel on Steel knows, we are a daily program dedicated to the sharpening of ideas. I'm John Leffler. My engineer is Denise LaRue. And we will tackle issues in all forms of the Christian church that we feel other people are not tackling, or we will tackle issues that the media at large will not cover simply because of the fact we feel they have a bias against that. And this is basically the purpose of the program. We've been on the air for about a year and a half. We have positive response. Occasionally we cause some controversy. Controversy is not the goal, but the exploration of ideas is really critically so. And so we're off and running for another exciting week. At least I hope it's exciting. I always hate it when someone tells me something's exciting. I usually like to say, well, let me be the judge of whether or not it's going to be exciting. So for today and tomorrow, we're going to have as our main guest anyway for today, Reverend Nicholas Gruner, called Father Nicholas Gruner by Catholics, and he is publisher of the Fatima Crusader, which is a magazine that promotes honoring the miracle or the manifestation at Fatima. Depends on your point of view, which occurred back in 1970, along with its implications for today, because there were prophecies made at Fatima, subsequently called the first, second, and third secrets of Fatima, and these were passed on down to one of the three children that this being, allegedly the Virgin Mary, appeared to these three children, and she gave them these secrets. We'll go into that in a minute. Tomorrow, back on the program, a year after we did an interview with him regarding his book, Keys with His Blood, is Dr. Malachi Martin, and many of our listeners know him. They are familiar with his work. We've had him on the program, I would say, about a grand total of 5 times in the last year. Many people will remember the debate that Dr. Martin and Dave Hunt consented to do as to whether or not Roman Catholicism was a victim of the New Age or actually part of it, at least in parts. And it was an exciting 2 days. We had nothing but favorable comments from listeners in all quarters on that program. We will not be on the air on the 25th of December, and on Thursday, Dr. Anis Shorosh, who is a Christian Palestinian, will be on the program. You recall that a mob attacked him when he was debating Muslims in South Africa a few months ago. We mentioned that in our update on Christian persecution worldwide, and he managed to get away with his life from that, but the car he was riding in got its windows smashed, and one of the people with him was superficially stabbed. The stab blow had been meant for Dr. Shorosh, and we will be talking about the subject of Islam. Also, we'll do some new revelations about things going on in the New Age movement as we move towards the Earth Summit. And this will trigger also into Friday when Stuart Best will come back on the program. We had talked earlier with Stuart about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the potential for undoing our constitutional rights during a crisis here in this country, whether it's economic or physical or warlike crisis. He will be talking about how that figures in with prophecy. And on Monday, a week from today, John Medina, Outer Limits of Life, which is another exciting look at when does life really begin? What is the claim of scientists? And this figures, of course, directly into the abortion issue, which rages. When does life really begin? How do we define it? All right. Today, I am looking forward to the program. We have spent some time lining up these programs. I'm sure most people in Denver are aware of the alleged apparitions at the Mother Cabrini Shrine, which we had at least 1,000 people appear here about 2 weeks ago on December 8th, which in the Roman Catholic liturgical calendar is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. And this lady, who is from Colorado, claims that she is seeing apparitions of the Virgin. She has been to Medjugorje, which is another of the sites, along with with Garabandal. And of course, you could take it all the way back to Guadalupe, back in Mexico, etc., etc., etc. But my first and prime guest that I'm really pleased to have come on the program, who is with us by telephone today, is Reverend Nicholas Gruner, and I would like to make sure you are with us. Can you hear me all right? I don't have him yet there, Denise.
Sorry.
He is on. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. That was a mistake on my button here, and I apologize for that. I appreciate your taking time to do this. I know it's an hour out of your busy schedule, but we felt you were probably the most straightforward and verbal spokesperson for the Fatima movement to explain its nature from a Catholic perspective. And so I appreciate your taking time to do that.
Well, it's good to be here today, John.
Thank you. Where are you located anyway, just so
I'm
people know?
near Buffalo, just across the river from Buffalo in Canada, in Fort Erie, which is not far from Niagara Falls, just to give it a location for you there.
That's fine. That's great. I honestly didn't know all the times I've been calling your office there. I never bothered to line up the area code with where you were. So, second interviewer with me today is Kathleen R. Hayes, who is founder of the National Research Institute. Kathleen has taken a contrarian view over the past year to Fatima. And in some cases, Catholics are miffed. In some cases, they are unmiffed. But I'd like to make it clear from the start that this is not a debate situation, and we promise the people involved that we would not engage it that way. This is a conversation and more an exploration of ideas. So, Reverend Gruner, would you like to start off by giving us a quick history of what Fatima was? I could do it, but I might like to hear it from your perspective for a change.
Certainly. The Blessed Virgin appeared to three children whose names were Lucy, Jacinta, and Francesco in 1917. From May 13th to October 13th, she appeared at noon each day. On the sixth apparition, or the 13th of October, as she promised 3 months prior to that, there would be a great miracle. 70,000 people had gathered at that promise and saw the great miracle of the sun, which not only did the people see the sun spin and dance, as they describe it in the newspaper, but also it came plunging down on top of them, it appeared to be doing that. The people fell on their knees thinking it was going to fall and it was the end of the world. The sun went back to its place in the sky, and when the people got up, their clothes, which had been wet from the rain for the last 12 hours, their clothes were dry and clean, and they had been kneeling in the mud, walking through the mud. Their clothes were also clean. Apart from that, they were cured. The sick, the blind, the lame could see and walk after this miracle. At the same time, they were cured, and also a number of people, including atheists who had come there to scoff, were converted back to the Catholic faith, to the Christian belief and belief in God, and so, as St. Augustine tells us, that God, in converting a sinner, is a greater miracle than creating the world, because when God created the world, it's made out of nothing, but when God converts a sinner, the sinner is converted against his will, and that, St. Augustine argues, is a greater miracle. But these miracles were all worked for the purpose of endorsing that God was telling us, this is my message, and this message comes from me, and I want you to pay attention to it. It's true. And that's the message made prophecies about the end of the First World War, the Second World War, the rise of communist Russia. In fact, I didn't call it communism, talked about errors. I listened to you describe, the New Age movement and the New World Order and all that stuff is all covered by the same thing Our Lady was speaking about at Fatima. And we have not paid attention, by and large, to the message of Fatima. The Pope and the bishops have not paid attention, have not obeyed, and as a result, we are going straight for this New World Order and the one world and government and enslavement and so forth. And Our Lady of Fatima wants to prevent that, but she needs our cooperation, and basically we're getting close to the end of the time that's predicted, that we have the time of mercy, and then we will have the chastisement.
That's what I would like to get into. I would like to point out to listeners, and I've done this many, many times when we have talked about Fatima. The most recent was when we had scientist John Sajak on the program a few weeks ago, that Fatima really did happen. It is not an illusion in some Catholic's mind or a few visionaries. There were over 70,000 people at the site. The manifestation, or miracle as some people would call, was seen up to 40 miles away, as I recall, this whole thing, and seen by many, many, many people who were skeptics. And so you can't chalk it off. It really did happen. You have to accept that, no matter what your religious bias or belief. Now, of the three children, two died very quickly after this in the early 1920s. The
one in 1919, April the 4th, the other one in 1920, February the 20th. Our Lady had predicted at the beginning of the apparitions that she would come to take them soon to heaven, but that she would leave Lucy sometime longer on earth and she's still alive today. She is Sister Lucy of the Immaculate Heart. She's 84 years old this year. She'll be 85 next March, if God spares her life that long. But anyway, she's certainly still with us today.
I can tell you've heard these questions before because they rattle out of your mind in that fashion. All right, there were 3 secrets given her. They're called 3 secrets. We know of 2 of them, right? And the third is still a secret.
Well, we know all 3 of them. The third one has been unofficially revealed, you might say, but certainly the 2 of them have been officially revealed. And more precisely, it's really one secret divided in 3 parts. And I'm not trying to be picky about this, but because we know it is one secret divided in 3 parts, we can deduce from all the known parts as well as the conclusion what the third part is. In the light of the last 40 years' history, we can figure it out. And there's a book on that subject, The Third Secret, by Frere Michel, who took 4 years to research it. And I will offer the book to anybody, and if they tell me that they don't think they know the third secret after reading this book, I'll be glad to refund their money. But basically, we're the English language publishers of it, and Cardinal Ratzinger has told us, I have read the third secret. It concerns the dangers to the faith, and therefore to the life of the Christian, and therefore to the life of the world. It concerns the end times. It concerns, it's already contained in sacred scripture. That's Cardinal Ratzinger, who has read the third secret, tells us that's what it is. But there's a lot more to say about it than that, but that's just to give it briefly to you.
That's good. We'll be coming up on a break in about a minute and a half. I will just recite. As a matter of fact, I have the book by Frere Michel, the English version of it. And the first part, the children had a vision of hell, which is amply described in many of the descriptions of the appearances at Fatima. The second was the prophecy about world peace, that God will grant peace to the world, but only after 2 conditions have been met. Number 1, Russia must be consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And I assume 2 is the communion of reparation of what is called the first Saturdays of the month must become an established practice. And that would, of course, I would assume, confess, receive communion at Mass, and then say a rosary and keep Mary company for 15 minutes while meditating on the mysteries of the rosary. Now, those are the 2 conditions from the first and second. All right, for those of you who've gotten in on the program late, we are talking about Fatima today with our guest, Reverend Nicholas Gruner, who is publisher of the Fatima Crusader, which is a 4-color publication promoting the issue of devotion to Mary and Fatima, and also fulfilling the conditions that Mary set down when she appeared at Fatima. That is the message. My guest interview today is Kathleen R. Hayes with me. We're talking about the subject of Fatima. Tomorrow, Dr. Malachi Martin will be back with us. He said he would be delighted to be with us on Christmas Eve and look at his book a year later called The Keys of This Blood, The Struggle for World Dominion Between Mikhail Gorbachev, Pope John Paul II, and the capitalist West. And the appearances at Fatima figure very strongly into what he says are the Pope's plans for the future of the Roman Catholic Church. So that is the plan for these 2 days. This is Steel on Steel. I'm John Leffer. All of these programs are available for $5 apiece. You may get a free listing of all of our programs for 1-800-829-5646. That's 1-800-829-5646. We do have a monthly subscription for $20. We're an information channel covering issues which you simply won't find on a lot of other media. And we will be back in a minute. Tom Gardner, you've shown some people how they can stop paying life insurance premiums, and you've saved others money on their monthly insurance payments. Now, if you can do all that, then why are there so many people who are hesitant to call you for a quote?
They're skeptical, John. Most people don't want a high-pressured salesman selling them something they don't need, and I don't blame them.
All right, so what do you do about that?
When you call me, realize that as a Christian myself, I want to help you, whether you need insurance or not. I just met with an older couple who needed several $1,000s to pay for some medical expenses. I found the money they needed in the cash value of their present policy.
But if they couldn't buy more insurance, then what did you get out of it?
These people were so thrilled that I found that money for them that they referred me to their daughter and a neighbor, and that's what it's all about. Someone calling me can feel comfortable talking with me. I'm not an arm twister. I'm just there to help.
Listeners, if you want to reduce your life insurance payments or stop paying them altogether, call Tom Gardner right now at 690-4679. And back into Steel on Steel. Exciting topic today. It always has been the mystery of Fatima, the appearance of what Catholics call the Virgin Mary at Fatima to three children. Fundamentalists in some cases take a very contrarian view, saying that it was a demon that appeared there because it said some very unscriptural things, and that's why it's always a hot button issue on both sides. Catholics who support Fatima believe that the Catholic Church has failed to fulfill Mary's requests, and therefore a certain amount of cataclysms and disasters are going to come upon both the Church, the Pope, and the world as a result of that. We'll be back to that conversation with Father Nicholas Gruner in just a minute, and with Kathleen R. Hayes. I do need to tell you, of course, Steel on Steel is supported by your income. We are in a 90 to 120-day startup phase. It is very critical. We are literally doing this full-time. Steel on Steel Productions is actually my wife and myself who do this on a full-time basis, and occasionally we like to eat. And so because of that, and until the program becomes self-supporting, we are asking all of you, the thousands of you who listen to this program on a regular basis, and really appreciate it. You've told us tremendously that we're an information channel carrying information that just nobody else will simply tackle, especially if it involves controversy on some form of Christianity or Judaism. We're going to try to keep this channel open. We do need your help, and that's just the way it is. I've made my Boulder Turnpike pledge, and what that means is the toll booths have gone up at the beginning of the program as we started the second series. As soon as the program becomes self-supporting on both the KLTT and the Steel on Steel side, we're both doing this as a joint venture, then we'll take the toll booth down and we'll quit asking you for money, and you can just simply sit back in your car and watch that car, okay, as you're driving, and do it. Anyway, if you'd like to support us, Steel on Steel's post office box is P.O. Box 740-461, Arvada, Colorado 80006. P.O. Box 740-461, Arvada, Colorado 80006. We do sell these programs $5 a piece. You can make as many copies as you want and give them to friends. If you want a free listing of the programs, 1-800-829-5646. And I sincerely mean that the help that you people have given us these last 2 to 2.5 weeks have made an absolutely critical difference. But please don't stop. We really need to keep rolling through this, and I know the economy's bad. I know everything's tight. We're going to be a light for you if we can, if the Lord allows, during this time of rough economy and rough Christian living. All right, Reverend Gruner, what I would like to do is, there were 3 secrets. Obviously, these were given to Lucia, and we are at the point that...
Children, but Lucy still has them, of course. And they were published by Lucy, Sister Lucy, in early 1940s, the first 2 parts. And the 3rd part has been given to the Holy Father. In fact, the faithful were promised in 1960 that they would have it read to them by the Bishop of Fatima. And if the Bishop of Fatima should die by that time, the Cardinal Patriarch of Lisbon promised to the public that he would read it to the faithful in 1960. As you know, John, that has not happened. The public word given by these 2 bishops has not been fulfilled. The Bishop of Fatima has an excuse. He died in 1957. The Cardinal Patriarch of Lisbon said it was taken out of his hands without his being consulted, and that, from all the documentation we have, is true. But the fact is, they were promised to the faithful, and the faithful have not had that promise fulfilled by members of the hierarchy who are responsible for that. I can get into that if you like.
That's where I would like to go, because basically we've covered to this point in other programs in times past, although we're doing it again since we always assume we have new listeners. Is there a kind of a conspiracy to suppress what is called now the 3rd secret, the 3rd prophecy from Fatima?
Well, we have published a book, a little pamphlet rather, and it's called, also we've published articles entitled The Plot to Silence Our Lady and The Plot Thickens, and the little pamphlet I referred to as The Chronology of a Cover-Up, which you put out about a year ago. There's not only the attempt to, it's obvious that they have not published the 3rd secret officially after giving their word that they would, but also there's an attempt to even pretend that certain conditions have been met, and they even have got fake letters in Sister Lucy's name circulating. I've got copies. I've even got one original myself here, there is definitely an attempt by enemies of Fatima within the Church to stop the full message of Fatima from being known.
Dr. Gruner, this is Kathleen Hayes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What would be the reason for wanting to suppress these? What would be the reason within Catholicism for wanting to suppress the 3rd secret?
Well, I think Catholics who know the message have no reason at all to suppress it, as long as they're loyal, faithful Catholics. there is a Vatican-Moscow agreement entered into by the Vatican in 1962. They were pressured into it, although certainly some went along with it. But the bottom line of this agreement is, and it's a fact, and we published this also, I have denounced it as a betrayal of the Catholic Church, but the agreement basically goes something like this, that the Vatican will not criticize the regime, the communist regime in Moscow, and that agreement has been fulfilled from 1962, from October the 12th until the present time, except for a brief period from February, March of 84 to about September of 84. Except for that 6-month period, roughly 6 months, the Vatican has maintained its end of the bargain. Moscow has not maintained its end of the bargain, but even if it had, it would still be a moral agreement for the Vatican to enter into. And that is the number one obstacle against the full Fatima message, because Fatima is directly against such an agreement, and it would, by implication, denounces it.
Was this part of the aggiornamento that Pope John the 23rd had as part of Vatican Council II in trying to make more moves towards Moscow and toward the Russian Orthodox Church?
Well, it could. Also, the other thing, you've touched on another point there, John. The other part of the reason for the agreement at that time was Pope John 23rd wanted, observers from the Russian Church, the KGB Russian Church, as distinct from the North American Russian Orthodox, and he wanted observers there. And this is the terms that Nicodim, the second in command of the Russian Church in Moscow, laid down, that the Vatican must maintain silence with regard to the regime of the Kremlin. And he laid those terms down publicly. They were published in a Delhi paper in India in November 22nd, 1961. And those terms, as I mentioned, have been maintained since October 12, 1962. I hope I've answered your question, but if I've missed it, I'll try and get it.
Dr. Gruner, well, I'm not sure that it has, but let me ask you this. I understand that what the apparition told Lucia was that the third secret was to be revealed in 1960.
Yes.
And so what do we have? 4 popes who have not done that. Why?
Well, because they themselves are bound. I see that you have Malachi Martin coming on your program tomorrow, and if you read his book on the Jesuits, for example, pages 85 to 88, which we published in our Fatima Crusader, with his permission,
right.
He speaks about that Pope John Paul II himself has, in fact, agreed, as his predecessors did, to maintain this agreement. I still maintain that such an agreement is null and void, and in fact it is a betrayal of the Catholic Church. But in fact they feel bound. I don't say necessarily only morally. I don't even think that it's necessarily morally that they feel bound, but they nevertheless feel bound to maintain the agreement. The purpose of the agreement was, of course, to stop the bloodshed of the Catholic faithful behind the Iron Curtain by agreeing to silence on the Catholic side, of the Vatican side, the Kremlin agreed to lessen the persecution of the Catholics behind the Iron Curtain.
Which it hasn't done, like you said.
Which it hasn't done.
Right.
Joseph Teredia, for example, who I've met personally, he's been on my television show, has told me that he's been in jail for 23 years in Soviet prisons and gulags, and that he started going in after the Vatican-Moscow Agreement started. And he's not the only one, but he's one that was actually freed and got to the West in '88.
Well, Dr. Gruner, we do have some indication, of course, as to what the third secret, as you said, would be. Supposedly, and again I refer to the apparition at Fatima, said to Lucy that many nations will disappear from the face of the earth, and she also...
using the Portuguese is annihilantato, or annihilated, okay?
Yes.
And I've had Catholic commentators say, well, that's happened already. No, that has not happened already. Our Lady, when she uses she's very literal. Annihilated, as you know, means to make nothing. Nihil, coming from the Latin nihil, which is nothing, and nations does not refer to the state, but refers to the people. And we could say that states have been annihilated if one wanted to speak metaphorically, but the nations of people have not been annihilated, although in Cambodia they came close, with 3 million out of 6 million being murdered within 3 years. But that prophecy has not yet been fulfilled, the annihilation of nations. But
Correct.
it's just around the corner.
Art, that's my next question. Now, with the situation happening in the Soviet Union, with it dissolving, are we closer to maybe nuclear war or some kind of major cosmic calamity now than, say, we were a year ago?
I think we are closer, but there's two ways that this can happen. One is, certainly the AIDS crisis, according to some scientists, is that it could wipe out humanity in given 50 years. Obviously, it can do a lot of damage in the meantime. Or there's nuclear wars, the other way of wiping out nations, of annihilating nations. I'm not limiting it to, there could be other ways too. Are you still there?
I am. Dr. Gruner, the main part of the secret of Fatima, the third secret, was that Russia was to be consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary.
Yes.
Now, there are two stories as to whether or not that has been accomplished. Wasn't it in March of 1984 that John Paul consecrated the world to Mary with a mention of Russia?
I'll let you finish, but I know the story, but let me just, to give a context to that, Pope Pius XII consecrated the world on October 31st and December the 8th. Paul VI consecrated the world on November 21st, 1964, and John Paul II consecrated the world in May 13th, 1982, as well as the one that you just mentioned, March 25th, 1984.
Well, since Russia is within the world, doesn't that count, or are we going back to this idea of having to have a full collegiality and which means all the bishops around the world, along with the Pope, consecrate Russia? And if that didn't happen, then the other message was that Russia would be the instrument of heaven's chastisements of the world.
That's correct.
So if that's true, and the popes have not obeyed Mary, then we could be looking at a very perilous time very quickly.
That's right, and the Pope has not obeyed, and we are looking at a very perilous time very quickly. Despite what they're giving you in the newspapers about glasnost, perestroika, restructuring, or whatever else they call it, it's all smoke and mirrors. We've pointed that out in our newspaper, and if any of your listeners, or if you yourself, Kathleen, would like to get a copy of our magazine, they're certainly welcome to it by calling us toll-free 1-800-263-8160. We'd be glad to send to them free of charge, pointing out what I'm saying. Obviously, in an hour's program, I can't demonstrate everything I'm saying.
Of course. One other question. With Yeltsin seeming to be more in the forefront, it seems he is setting up a dictatorship. When we come back, I think I hear John's music in the background, which is a very clever way of telling us we're about to break.
We're about to break.
What I want to know is, what do you think is Pope John Paul's impression of Boris Yeltsin when we come back?
Okay, Nicholas Gruner, we'll do that when we get back from the station break here, right? You're right about time. I really admit that it just flies, but I would say your rapid-fire speech is covering a tremendous amount of territory in a short amount of time. Today we're talking to Father Nicholas Gruner, who is a publisher of the Fatima Crusader and one of the leading experts on Fatima, its history, and its goals from inside Catholicism. There are other people, of course, who analyze it from the outside. I'm John Leffler. My guest interviewer today is Kathleen R. Hayes from the National Research Institute. And Denise LaRue is our engineer. Denise Engineer is our LaRue. It's really been a wild Monday here. Anyway, Steel on Steel, talking about Fatima today and tomorrow. And we'll be back after this break in just a minute. And this is Steel on Steel, back for a real exciting conversation today. I'm actually enjoying this. Some days we get into real heavy material. We've had our listeners tell us, boy, it got so heavy I couldn't even take it, and panicky. But one of the ones that has been my favorite for well over 25 years is Fatima, and I don't really mean that in a demeaning way. I've followed this for, well, way from before I was a teenager. Anyway, I'm John Leffler, interviewing today Nicholas Gruner, who is publisher of the Fatima Crusader, and my guest interviewer is Kathleen R. Hayes. I would like to mention to you people, I do this every 15 minutes. We try to keep Steel on Steel here as an information channel covering events that you will not hear on secular media or in much religious media. My P.O. Box is 740-461, Arvada, Colorado 80006. 740-461, Arvada 80006. And a lot of you will say, I can't afford much, but here's 5, here's 10. Well, believe it or not, the 5 or 10 really adds up. Our phone bills alone here can easily run, if we push it, $500 to $1,000 a month, just lining up guests and having guests on by long distance. We aim for a national high-quality show here. What you're paying for, so to speak, is what you get. What you hear on the air is the product. Don't have any hidden agendas. This is the program. We don't have orphanages in some places you don't know, missionaries in locations of the world you've never heard of. We're right here, and we're doing what we're doing. So if you like that type of information, please keep us going, and I appreciate it. Okay, back into the issue pot here now. We have a third secret. Can we discuss that? Oh, I'm sorry, Kathleen wanted to do something before we did that.
Dr. Gruner was going to discuss Yeltsin. Where do you think John Paul is with regard to Boris Yeltsin? Do you see him as someone favorable or someone that is not favorable?
I couldn't obviously speak for the Pope because he's not talked to me about this or anything else for that matter, but I would think that the Vatican, as far as I can see, and therefore Pope John Paul II himself, will do business with, or conduct themselves the same way they have with Yeltsin as they have with Gorbachev, if Yeltsin in fact replaces Gorbachev. My own view is that Gorbachev and Yeltsin are basically together in this. They have been from the beginning, and it's convenient right now for them to put on this show for us. But either way, whether I'm right or wrong, and I'm not saying that what I stand for doesn't fall or rise on my opinion about Yeltsin and Gorbachev, the bottom line is that this Vatican-Moscow agreement, until it is broken, and it is broken by the Soviets or whatever they call themselves today, it will be it binds the Catholic Vatican to not do its duty to denounce the errors of communism. And as long as the Vatican stays silent, and for that matter silences a number of priests and bishops and cardinals, then the communism, or whatever form they want to call it, the New World Order, will advance and take over, because most of the sheep have been lulled into silence, lulled into a false sense of security by the silence of their pastors.
But it's just so you know, you're not alone. A number of the guests we've had on the program for the last 2 weeks have said the same thing. It's not dead by any means, and it's formally a regroup under a cover at the moment.
Yes.
In terms of the Soviet Union. It does seem to be a real reneging of the responsibility of the Roman Church to denounce evil, because if you agree that you're not going to do that, you've automatically sort of defaulted on your responsibility.
That's right. It's a betrayal. He called it a betrayal, and when I read it from Jean Husset, who was the one who exposed to me by his French writings in his paper, his weekly paper, the existence of this agreement, and demonstrating its existence not only by documentation, published documentation, but also by the facts that we can see for the last 30 years. He called it a betrayal. I thought he was too strong in his words at first, when I realized, of course, that the word bishop in Greek means watchman, and St. Paul tells us in the Acts of the Apostles that from among your own number will arise some, talking about priests and bishops, who will lead the faithful away from them, away from God, away from Christ, and this Vatican-Moscow agreement is basically a denial, is like a watchman at 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone's asleep, coming out of his watchtower, going across the field, talking to the enemy and saying, when you guys come in, we won't sound the alarm. And if we had any watchman in a walled city paid and sworn to do his duty, we would obviously call that a betrayal when the enemy comes within the gate. Well, that's exactly what the Vatican-Moscow Agreement is to not denounce the errors of communism, which in 1960 would be laughable for any serious, informed high school graduate even, much less professor of the seminary or priest, to suggest you could be Catholic and communist at the same time. Today we have this so-called liberation theology, which is neither liberation nor theology, but it very openly says that you can be a Catholic and a communist at the same time, which of course is ludicrous and blasphemous, actually. Well,
Dr. Gruner, let's say that, put forth a possible scenario here. Let's say that that the Soviet Union or Russia does launch some nuclear attacks, or something begins to develop, and some of the republics are not in agreement with others, such as it's happening with Georgia right now, let's say that there is a nuclear attack. Maybe the United States even receives a first strike or a strike,
Yes.
And there is a limited nuclear war.
Yes.
Would not John Paul then be personally responsible, since he has not consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary?
I would. I'll answer your question in one word in a moment, but I'd like to just make some distinctions, okay? And the distinction is that what is a person is in the objective moral order. That is, if I were to take something, if I saw $1,000 belonging to you, but I thought it was my own, and I took it, I have committed an injustice against you. But I'm not guilty, in as much as I didn't realize when I took it, and if I realize later, of course, I have to give it back. But I wasn't doing it maliciously, okay? So speaking about the responsibility, yes, he is responsible, not only he, but also all the others who have not fulfilled their part of the Fatima message, but he is responsible for not doing his duty. The question is he guilty, or is he personally liable before God? Only God can judge that, because I don't know what his subjective state of mind is. But in the objective moral order, he is supposed to do it. He is strictly bound to do it. I've proved that in my book, World Enslavement or Peace. I've sent this book to every cardinal and bishop and archbishop in the Catholic Church. I have not had one written reply pointing out anywhere in my book where I'm wrong. In fact, the Pope himself said at Fatima in 1982, the message of Fatima imposes an obligation on the Church. The only thing I can tell you is that some people close to the Pope have convinced him that he is not bound. Whether he's guilty for being ignorant of the fact, that only God knows. But he is obligated. He is not fulfilling his duty, and he, in the objective moral order, is responsible, yes.
Does this tie in? Malachi Martin, in his book, The Jesuits and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church, talked about a confrontation between, at the time, Pedro Arrupe, who was Superior General of the Jesuits,
yes,
and Pope John Paul II. And Malachi maintains that there's been a systematic undermining of genuine Roman Catholic theology for about 75 years, I would guess, ever since modernism entered the Church actually really longer, since the time of Leo XIII. And if that's so, Malachi also maintains that the Vatican is riddled with people who are Masons and possibly what we would call New Agers, or they're believing in other doctrines. Do you suspect that this plays a large role in that?
I believe it certainly does. I think that Malachi is right, that there are a number of Masons who are cardinals. In fact, it's not just Malachi who says that. There was a Catholic priest by the name of Don Francesco Putti who published the names of 12 cardinals in Rome in his little newspaper called CC No No, which translates yes, yes, no, no. Let your words be yes for yes and no for no. Everything else comes from the evil one, quoting Matthew's gospel, quoting our Lord himself. And not only did he name these cardinals, but he also gave their code name and their code number and the date of their entrance. He also defended himself publicly in a lawsuit when someone in the Osservatore Romano, the editor, in fact, made libel statements against him. Don Francesco Putti successfully defended himself. To this day, his published statements within the Church have never been denied. And I don't think he didn't stop that there was only 12, but he only published 12 of them. And so to say that there are Masons in the Vatican, I think you can say that without hesitation today as being true. Not all cardinals or all bishops are Masons, but there are a number of them in powerful positions. And I think that certainly at the time of Don Francesco Putti died in '84, his magazine still goes on. There have never been any withdrawals that I'm aware of, any corrections by him or anyone else on these points.
Right. It would seem like the Masonry was involved in what was ultimately known as Il Crac Sindona, the Sindona affair with the Institute for Religious Works, which is the Vatican Bank.
The P2 Masonic Lodge had a lot of control. The whole Bank Ambrosian affair, which has never really come to the public light in this country. They blame the Vatican for it, but it's much more a Masonic thing which brought down that bank. The man that was found hanging the Calvi was actually executed by the Masons. They used to call it a suicide, but the family of Calvi have now got it said in court that it was not a suicide, and hanging from a public place such as London, Blackfriars Bridge or whatever bridge it was, or London Bridge, that's the kind of execution that's carried out by Masons to set an example for the other Masons not to follow his example. there's many things, and certainly I think since Sindona, it was in the P2, a Masonic lodge also. But yes, it's a large subject in itself.
I didn't want to get off on that, but I thought it was critical because the obvious question for anyone who is a Catholic would be to ask is if Mary thought this was so important, why isn't the Church going along with it? Why the effort to sidetrack this? You can't dispute the miracle, so then you have to make a choice as to whether or not it was from God or from Satan, and if you make a choice that it's from God, then theoretically you should be obeying it. So I guess the obvious question is, why is this thing getting derailed so frequently?
Well, you see, when you come to the third secret, I think that explains it to you. The third secret, as our book points out, Frère Michel, I call it our book because we published it, but he wrote it in France, published in 85, and we have published that in about 1990 here. But in his book, more precisely, it's his book, he points out that the third secret not only refers to the dangers to the faith, but he quotes Father Alonso, the archivist of Fatima from 1965 to 81. Father Alonso, just before he died, published a little article pointing out that the third secret also refers to the guilt of the upper hierarchy for the state of apostasy within the Catholic Church today. And this, of course, touches on what we were just mentioning, Masons and, for that matter, communists or crypto-communists or philo-communists within the Vatican and other places, some even in North America here, that these prelates, these bishops and cardinals do not want the third secret to be revealed because it would expose the very fact that they're the ones who are doing the damage from within. The third secret identifies to the faithful enough for them to realize that they can't give their trust to certain cardinals and certain bishops, that in fact they must resist them, as we have been saying. Those who are promoting the New World Order agenda or promoting the New Ager, if they are, or promoting communism or promoting Masonic ideas, all those Our Lady of Fatima would warn the faithful in her third secret, supposed to be published by 1960, and telling the faithful to resist and not to follow those bad bishops and cardinals. And priests, for that matter.
The ones that Malachi would say are just a little out of line at this stage of the game.
Well, they're not just a little out of line. I mean, as a Catholic priest, I'm aware of my own, we all need the grace of Christ to be redeemed, and therefore we, if anyone says he's not a sinner, he's a liar, says St. John. But as our Lord says, the just man sins 7 times a day. There are many good priests and bishops and cardinals, and I've met a number of them, but there are some who are not just a little out of line. Some are basically betraying the Catholic Church and betraying Christ himself.
All right, we're up for a break here talking with Nicholas Gruner, who publishes the Fatima Crusader. They're in Canada. They do have an 800 number if you'd like to look at this magazine. It's 1-800-263-8160. This is a Catholic publication and not necessarily Catholic endorsed. I should point that out because of the fact that I think, Reverend Gruner, you're taking a fairly contrarian position to some Catholic straight-liners as well, and I'd like to talk about this coming back. But anyway, this is John Leffler with Kathleen R. Hayes, and we will be back with Steel on Steel in just a minute.
Is there such a thing as a Spirit-filled Catholic? Well, if you come from a Catholic background and consider yourself a Spirit-filled Christian, here's a special invitation for you. St. Vincent's Anglican Catholic Church invites you to a special Christmas Eve service beginning with Scripture and carols at 11 and Mass at midnight. Our worship is Spirit-filled with Bible-based teaching and Holy Communion. So if you're a Spirit-filled Christian with a Catholic background, we invite you home to St. Vincent's. Join us Christmas Eve at 11. Just look for our signs at 53rd and Federal in North Denver.
Soon people will be ushering in the new year in a variety of ways. Some will try to wash away painful memories, only to realize they're still around the next morning, but now accompanied by even greater despair. The pain and hurts of unfulfilled dreams, broken relationships, and disappointments of life can only be truly healed by God's love and His grace. In 1992, that's the message we dedicate ourselves to once again. KLTT can have a tremendous impact in people's lives throughout the Front Range during the coming year. Your support of our advertisers is the key to our continued success In 1992,
Steel on Steel, last part today in a very rapidly moving conversation. We're talking with Father Nicholas Gruner from the Fatima Crusader, who is a promoter of the honoring of Mary through Fatima and Mary's prophecies. We're doing this as a 2-day look into Fatima as part of our normal Steel on Steel jump into something that nobody else would want to dare deal with on the air in many cases. I need to ask Reverend Gruner whether or not he gets much flack on this, etc. Remember, I do need your support to keep this information channel open. My P.O. Box is 740-461, Arvada, Colorado 80006. And people tell me I should hype you people a bit more to get you to give, but I don't believe in doing that. I believe if you want to hear this program, you'll help us stay on the air. And I don't like to take time out doing 20 minutes worth of commercials to keep us going. I think the information is much more important. P.O. Box 740-461, Arvada, Colorado 80006. You know, that what I really wanted to deal with in the church was there seem to be different factions in the church. There seems to be like a Mary cult developing now, or a Fatima cult, or a Medjugorje cult. There seem to be New Age groups within the church, even occult groups. Do you have that same observation, Reverend Gruner?
Well, first of all, the reason why I stay with Fatima, because you've mentioned Medjugorje or other places of alleged apparitions. The message of Fatima has been approved by the church. 5 popes themselves have endorsed the message of Fatima. 2 popes have gone there 3 times. Pope John Paul II has gone there twice. In fact, he's going there again this May 13th, 1992. And if anyone wants to join us on our pilgrimage at that time, they can certainly get more information by phoning our 800 number that you gave, 800-263-8160. And I would say, though, that there are different groups or factions in the church, or appear to be in the church. You know that to be a Catholic, one has to maintain one has to believe whole and entire the whole Catholic doctrine, and anything that's been solemnly defined. If a person wants to maintain their membership, they have to believe that whatever the church has defined has been revealed by God.
This would include the Assumption of the Immaculate Conception.
Definitely, and there are people who claim to be Catholic who either A, question, or B, deny some known Catholic dogmas, and so strictly speaking, they're not Catholic unless they're in ignorance of their faith, and they do this out of ignorance. But once it's pointed out to them and they don't correct themselves in a short period of time, basically then they're no longer Catholic. Whether the church has ever passed a sentence against them, it's automatic. It's a matter of God excommunicates them for not believing the full Catholic doctrine.
Yeah, that's a very important concept, because I can wander into any Catholic church here in Denver and sit down next to somebody on Sunday morning and ask them what they believe. Do you believe this? Do you believe that? And they go, oh no, I don't believe that, but I'm still a Catholic. But they don't realize that de facto you've ruled yourself out of Catholicism at that point.
Yes, if they deny the Blessed Virgin Mary is immaculately conceived, or they deny that Christ rose from the dead, or if they deny that if they deny the transubstantiation, any number of things. There's, if they say that the church isn't founded, if the Pope isn't, of divine institution, all sorts of things. When we obviously are saying that the Pope has a job to do. Some people, some non-Catholics think that, and even perhaps some Catholics, although they wouldn't rephrase it this way, think that we're supposed to adore the Pope, or the Pope is God. Of course, he's not God, and the Pope is fallible when he does not exercise his infallibility. And there are very strict conditions for his infallibility, and they're very limited. And the Pope can make prudential mistakes. The history of the Church is full of them. And the present popes, for the last 4 popes, mentioning what Kathleen Hayes was mentioning before, 4 popes, and in fact it goes back to 1930, even Pius XI and Pope Pius XII have failed to obey Our Lady of Fatima, and they're strictly bound to obey. And they have, in the objective order, sinned. This is not to say that they're guilty. God knows their guilt. I'm not here to judge anyone's guilt. I've got enough to take care of my own conscience.
Dr. Gruner, obviously non-Catholics, the Orthodox born-again Protestants who probably would have a great deal of problem saying that Fatima was indeed of God. I am one of those. One of the messages, or the main messages, I understand it, of the apparition to Lucia was that it was critical to say rosaries,
Yes.
and to offer these different first Saturdays to her. If that's true, then what we're really saying is that it would be the messages that only devout Catholics then could save the world.
Pope Pius XII, in his encyclical Mystici Corporis on the mystical body of Christ in 1943, said, "It is indeed a great mystery, but nevertheless true, that the number of souls saved depends on how well Catholics cooperate with grace." And so I'm just rephrasing to you, but in the words of a pope, so it's not just me saying it. Yes, you've understood that it depends a lot on how Catholics cooperate with grace. On the other hand, the very fact that non-Catholics, and there are a number of them, help me get the message of Fatima out, no doubt they will have the reward for it. And if we, every giving a glass of water to a prophet, as our Lord says, will not go unrewarded. Welcoming a prophet as a prophet, you will also get the reward of a prophet for doing so. And so I'm not a prophet, but we are dealing with a prophetic message, and inasmuch as we're the largest voice actually amplifying this message around the world, Sister Lucy is basically under silence for the last 30 years, in fact, I'm playing a prophetic role inasmuch as I am repeating and making it understood to a wider audience when Sister Lucy herself has basically been put under a ban of silence.
Yes, let me go back to a couple of things, though, that the apparition said to Lucia during the 1917. One is that only she, Mary, is able to help us.
Hey, I've addressed that many times. I'd like perhaps you want to raise your difficulty, but I think I know what it is.
Well, that's it. I mean, obviously, it would seem like Christ has abdicated all of his power to Mary, which simply cannot happen.
I think that, certainly he only Christ, I mean, there's three persons in the Blessed Trinity, and only the second person became incarnate, and so Mary is a creature, she is not God. I mean, just so we can put our cards on the table, I'm sure you should know that, I'm sure you do know that, but the implication you might say, well, why does she say, only I can help you? And I think the answer to that is based on something which I believe many Protestant theologians accept. St. Augustine, who died, I think, around the year 430, and St. Augustine explains that there are certain graces, there are certain favors that God wants to give mankind, but he knows we don't deserve them, and that we will get pride thinking that somehow it was ourselves that caused these graces to come from God. And so God has reserved certain graces to be given to mankind only through the merits and only through the intercession of the saints. And God has reserved these graces because he knows we don't deserve them, but through the merits and intercession of the saints, we can deserve them, but through their merits and intercession. And that's what at Fatima we're told that the peace of the world has been entrusted to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And so when Our Lady says, only I can help you, or to put it in its more direct quote, she was speaking about herself in the third person. She said, of Our Lady of the Rosary, she had not yet identified herself on July, when she said, only she can help you. But you've understood substantially it is only I can help you. Yes, only the Blessed Virgin can help us in these circumstances. We do not deserve world peace. We do not deserve the conversion of Russia, but through the merits and intercession of Our Lady, God will give it to us, but God wants her to get the credit for it.
Of course, we're taking the Catholic position on that, though, Dr. Gruner. We're taking a Pope's proclamation on that, or we're taking what an apparition says, but there's nothing in the Scriptures that would indicate that.
No, but I'm just saying that St. Augustine, that's why I choose him for this. St. Augustine is a theologian that many, in fact, Luther was an Augustinian friar. I don't think he repudiated St. Augustine. And St. Augustine held that God would give certain graces and certain favors only through the intercession of the saints. I'm just giving you the ampler understanding of why St. Augustine would say that, and why a number of, I think, Protestant theologians would agree with that if they thought about it. But I'm just explaining myself.
Yes, but you see, the bottom line is going to be that, and you know this, that the Orthodox Christian, the non-Catholic, does not accept that only Mary can help us. They do not accept that she is the one that is warring with Satan, and to say that, it would seem like Christ himself has abdicated his glory and his power.
That she does, okay? Obviously, she can only do whatever she does by the power of Christ, okay? So when she says, only I can help you, it's understood in the context that she is obviously the mother of Jesus, and every power, every dignity, every good that she has comes entirely from her son. Okay?
So a Catholic then would have to pray first to Mary to get to Jesus.
I pray both to Mary and to Jesus, obviously, for our prayers to be heard, as you can find out by experience. And as I remember one Catholic telling me about it when he was in prison during the Second World War with a Protestant, and the Protestant man had been praying for some time for some favor, and he said, well, try asking Our Lady's help, it'll go much faster. And the man agreed with them afterwards that he got his favor a lot faster by first asking Our Lady's intercession. St. Bernard, who is a doctor of the Church, but who lived 200 or 300 years before Luther, also points out if you want your offering to be acceptable to God, put it through the hands of Mary. We have so much imperfection in ourselves that, and Mary being the Immaculate Conception, she knows how to give things to God, our prayers included, and to make them more acceptable and more readily heard by Him. Right. She plays a role we have the same thing, for example, I'm sure in families when a child gets into trouble. I mean, I'm not thinking of anything particularly Catholic or non-Catholic. If they go to their mother, when knowing that the father will be upset, the mother can soften the news in such a way that it makes it easier for the...
But God is upset with us, but that's why He gave us Jesus, so that Jesus is the only mediator we have, would be my argument to that.
I see. Well, except that we have a mediator with Jesus who is the God-man, a mediatrix, as Catholic theology calls it, with the mediator. Yes, there's only one mediator between God and man, and that is Jesus Christ, as Sacred Scripture tells us. At the same time, having the mother of the Son go to Him and intercede, as our Lord Himself on the cross said to all the disciples of our Lord, He said, "Behold thy mother." It was not just strictly a charge to St. John the Apostle.
Excuse me, we're just absolutely totally out of time, and I was getting disappointed the conversation was getting good here. And I apologize, we're just out of it, and we have a network to meet in about a minute and a half here. I'm John Leffler. This has been Steel on Steel for today, interviewing Father Nicholas Gruner from the Fatima Crusader, and my guest interviewer person here has been Kathleen R. Hayes from the National Research Institute. I wish we had more time for this. Tomorrow, Malachi Martin will be with us talking about John Paul II and how Fatima figures into his plans, which Malachi says are for world dominion. We'll have to take a look at it. My engineer has been Denise LaRue. For comments on the program or a copy of listings of our programs, 1-800-829-5646. 1-800-829-5646. Bye-bye. One year ago, we looked at the possibility that Pope John Paul II was actually a contender for world domination in the decade to come, contending against Mikhail Gorbachev and the capitalist West, mainly George Bush. This is a year later. And welcome to Steel on Steel. I'm John Leffler. This is a daily program dedicated to the sharpening of ideas. My engineer is Chris Ward today, and guest interviewer Kathleen R. Hayes from the National Research Institute. We are continuing a two-day project here to look at Fatima and how Fatima is affecting various things around the world in a religious and possibly geopolitical sequence. Yesterday we had Father Nicholas Gruner on, who is publisher of the Fatima Crusader. And today we have a guest who is no new person to this program, and at times is popular, I think, with the listeners, Malachi Martin, Dr. Yes. Malachi Martin. And he is author of a series of books, some of them novels, some of them factions. The latest one was Keys of this Blood, the struggle for world dominion between Mikhail Gorbachev, Pope John Paul II, and the capitalist West, of course, represented by George Bush. Previous to that, very significant book called The Jesuits and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church. And we should make it clear from the beginning that Malachi Martin is still a practicing Catholic, and I would say one of the more traditional Catholics. If you wish to hear pure Catholic doctrine the way it was before Vatican II, you should talk to Malachi Martin. And we've covered those on the shows before. We've had Dr. Martin on separately, and we have had him on in debate situation with Dave Hunt regarding the New Age. We were just chit-chatting before we went on the air about the situation in the world, the Earth Summit, and a lot of things we'd like to cover today. And Dr. Martin, and I will call you Malachi since you promised to hang up on me last time if I didn't.
That's right, John.
I just want to make sure I appreciate your time on Christmas Eve.
Don't be silly. It's an honor to be with you, John. It doesn't matter when.
Well, I appreciate that.
It's an honor to be with you and to be talking to your listeners, because there's a very sharp intellect wandering around where you live. People think and reflect, and perhaps it's the ambient, perhaps it's the snow and the mountains and that sort of business. I don't know.
As you're saying, we're snowing people?
There you are, you see, my words are twisted again.
You have a persecution complex.
I know, I had it when I was born.
Well, it was interesting. Yesterday we were talking with Nicholas Gruner, and I'm sure you know him.
I do indeed.
He agrees with your theory about one of the problems within Roman Catholicism being the fact that there are Masons in high places now in the Vatican.
Yes.
A year ago, you came out with your book. It was August, I believe, when the hard copies hit the stands, and you were talking about the fact that John Paul has a plan for what we would call world dominion. I don't know whether that's religious. You seem to feel that's religious. And
yes,
Kathleen,
strictly religious in his case.
Right.
Yes.
Kathleen feels it would be political as well. I'm
sure there'd be a political ricochet, but anyway.
And so one of the things that came out of the book was that, according to what Mary had told Pope John Paul in his post-assassination attempt vision, which was sort of a reconstruction of Fatima, is that of the contenders he was contending against, the two of them would be brought down and he would be the one left in terms of morality.
Yes.
Well, it seems like Mikhail Gorbachev is on his way out as of January 1st.
It does seem so, John, although, until the last nail is put in the coffin, as it were, to speak figuratively, of course, I do not discount Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, because a man like that is not going to go quietly into the darkness. So I don't rule him out. It's what he initiated and started, which will go on, whether he's there or not. Gorbachevism, the whole idea of interpenetration of the West and the softening up of its attitudes.
Because this is what a number of observers are saying, that things really are becoming destabilized in the Soviet Union rather than restabilized, that they're not standing down their army or their nuclear forces, contrary to what we might be led to believe.
No, they're not. They're going to gather it all together in a very firm compact. It's a funny darn thing, though, we haven't seen the final form of it all yet, because you both probably know that in the media at the present moment, which is necessary, they've latched onto the word Commonwealth. But if you listen to Yeltsin or to that brilliant man in Kazakhstan, whether you agree with him or not, they're using another word completely. The word for friend in Russian is drug, and friendship is drushchestvo or something like that. And they are now call themselves the so-drushchestvo, and you literally translate it's co-friendship. It's not Commonwealth in the English sense or the American sense, It's an association in co-friendship. And it's not going to stay there. It's not going to be permanent at all. It's the preliminary regathering form of the various units of the Soviet Empire. And where it goes from there depends on what Mikhail Gorbachev, what happens to him. I don't think God has yet done with Mikhail Gorbachev, as they say in the language.
No, I don't think so either. Dr. Martin, one of the things that I noticed that in your book, and I think the last time I talked to you, I'd read it 6 times. I read it again just recently, and I don't really want to read it anymore. One of the things that struck me on this last reading is that you are saying that John Paul expects that the New World Order will shipwreck.
That's right.
I agree with that.
As it's going, Captain.
Yes. In other words, too, also Alice Bailey, New Age prophetess, said that the New World Order would in fact do that. It would fail because it was really the first or the preliminary step to the world government, but that the New World Order and the world government are not synonymous. And so
Interesting point.
That it will, the structure will be there, but the actual New World Order will not. Let me follow up on, if I may, on the Gorbachev side and also jump over to Yeltsin.
Sure.
Yeltsin, I don't know how many people know, but he was trained by, well, one with Rockefeller money and also trained at Esalen.
An astounding fact, Kathleen, astounding fact.
The granddaddy of the New Age schools of thought, and because Huxley had a part in setting up Esalen. What is your assessment, or even, in fact, if you know John Paul's assessment of Boris Yeltsin?
Well, the assessment of Boris Yeltsin down there on the Tiber is that at best he's a passing phenomenon. Don't be surprised at that. They're regarded, of course, as at the present moment seems to be the linchpin and that sort of business of the present co-friendship or commonwealth, if we want to use the stereotype word we're all using now, understanding that it's not commonwealth, and as they say, the British Commonwealth or the French Commonwealth, but that he's not a permanent factor for various reasons. First of all, Yeltsin is quite doctrinaire, and that may hail back to his Esalen training, and he has New Age tendencies. Mm-hmm. And he's touching all the bases. You know, he went down and saw the Pope, and he's touching the various other bases itself. And he just seems to be, for them, a passing phenomenon. He's not permanent. Correctly or incorrectly, that's how they assess him. In the meanwhile, he doesn't seem to be doing anything on his own initiative, really. He seems to be pushed from behind somewhere. And I don't think he is permanent myself. I think it's a passing shape. And I think Mr. Baker James Baker, our Secretary of State, let fall 2 or 3 phrases, more or less in that sense, you know, more or less in that sense. Everybody realized that the thing is, as the French say, extremely F-L-O-U, very fluid, in other words, very, it's a bit viscous, but it's mainly fluid, and we don't know what's going to happen. There are 2 or 3 factors entering there which are very powerful. Number one is the ambition of Germany. You know, and John knows, the old dream of a Northern European alliance, the Russo-German alliance, which, by the way, would be overwhelming for the rest of Europe, economically and militarily. Then there's the second factor is China, about which not much is being said at the present moment. But if there's one direction the Chinese are looking from the Middle Kingdom at the present moment, it's to the west. Because if they are going to stick out for the moment as the sole champions of Marxism and communism and Leninism, they must feel the wind blowing about their ears, that as they say, there's trouble in the heavens. And we still have to solve the enigma of our benignity for China. It's a funny thing. We have a strange benignity towards the Chinese communists.
Despite the fact that they're persecuting both Catholic and non-Catholic Christians currently.
And despite the fact that they're simply out-and-out Marxists, they really are. Old vintage. If you wanted, you have it there. But we have a strange benignity in their regard. And I can guess why, but guesses are no use in the present context. The hero of that whole Chinese affair, of course, is Taiwan, with its superb economy and its solid ideological vote by the people in favor of what they're doing, and their ebullience, you know what I mean? However, they're completely dependent on the money system of the West, and that brings them right back to the wise men and to the 3 main contenders for world domination.
Right, Malachi Martin, we're up for a break. John Leffler here, Steel on Steel, doing interview with Kathleen R. Hayes. Actually, it's with Malachi Martin.
No, it's with...
And I'm along for the ride.
No, I'd rather be along for the ride. We Irishmen ride. Do you know what a sidecar is?
Yes, I do. Very definitely. I rode several in Ireland.
We invented the sidecar.
That's right. And charm. And wit.
Well, you must have a bit of that, you know.
Oh, yes.
My God, what's the use of living if it's going to be just grobe, as the Germans say.
I can't believe this. I'm stuck with 2 Irish people. Oh, no. We're talking about Pope John Paul II with Malachi Martin and the Vatican and world politics. We also, you brought up executive orders. I'd like to get that and Earth Summit as well before the program's out. This is Steel on Steel, and we will be back in just a minute.
Do you know that today in most states, the law allows abortion for any reason throughout all 9 months of pregnancy? Do you realize that abortion kills nearly 1/3 of the children conceived in the United States? Are you aware that more than 1.5 million children are aborted every year in America? That's more than 4,000 boys and girls every single day. Abortion, it's reached epidemic levels in our country, yet a recent poll conducted by the Gallup organization revealed that most Americans are totally unaware of the facts. This Saturday at 11 on KLTT, Americans United for Life will host a 1-hour radio special called Our Children, Our Hope. You'll hear from legal and medical professionals, as well as special guests including Sandy Patty, Chuck Colson, Debbie Boone, and Dr. James Kennedy. Please tune in Saturday at 11 and hear Our Children, Our Hope. That's Saturday at 11 on KLTT for 1 hour of shocking news about our country's abortion epidemic and how Christians across America are responding.
And back into Steel on Steel. This is part 2 of the program. I'm John Leffler with Kathleen R. Hayes interviewing Malachi Martin today. Malachi is author of Keys of This Blood, and if he would keep moving, he'd have another book out very shortly here, I'm sure. I always take this part of the program to...
Thank you, John. I heard you.
I'm running out of reading material. I keep telling you that. For people out there, I need support to keep going here. I'll tell most of our listeners.
Yeah.
Every response we get, they tell us that we're doing a great job. And
you are.
Thank you.
You're doing a marvelous job, John.
I'll send you the check in the mail, Malachi.
Okay, that's it. My check is in the mail, too.
Yeah, right. We were off the air, as you know, until about 5 minutes before we came back on, and I was telling somebody, some listeners were calling, and I said, save your checks to the Save the Lefflers Foundation here. Anyway, we need your help to keep going. We're in Series 2 here, started up about a month ago. We're on the air. Each of you out there who listens has been telling us we're doing a great job trying to keep a communications channel open that the biased secular media won't do. And it's going to be about 90 to 120 days, we estimate, before we become self-supporting. So for those of you who are big fans of this series, I'm asking you to help my wife and me and KLTT put food in our mouths on this program. We have very high expenses. And send us a contribution.
Seriously speaking, John, what's the mailing address for contribution?
Why, funny you should mention that. I was just going to do that. P.O. Box 740-461.
740-641.
No, 461.
461.
Arvada, Colorado.
Arvado.
Okay, that's A-R-V-A-D-A.
Got it.
Colorado.
Uh-huh.
That's a hard one. 80006.
800-000.
6.
So it's POB 740-461, Arvada, Colorado 80006.
Excellent. And if you want a free listing of the programs out, you're doing better than I am, as a matter of fact.
Well, John, I intend to contribute to you because I think you're a force for good.
I appreciate it. That's the goal anyway on the program. Let me give an 800 number here. If you would like a free listing of all of our programs, people, 1-800-829-5646, 1-800-829-5646. Each of those is available for $5. We don't hold the copy. We have copyright on them, but we don't hold it, meaning you're free to make copies, give them to friends. We feel the information is more critical than whatever, and some people say we're slitting our throats, but we're actually here to provide information like Malachi was talking about. All right, I think Malachi, Kathleen has the next question up here.
Sure has.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Yeltsin.
Yes.
It seems that there's a strong shift in Europe to the far, far right, neo-Nazi movement. Would Yeltsin, since his New Age connections are quite strong, and New Age really undercover is closer to Nazi or fascism than it is communism, though there is obviously very little difference between the two, would Yeltsin be more inclined toward fascist and perhaps even a return to some of the monarchy?
Well, I'll tell you, Kathleen, if I could bring in one distinction, I'll tell you what I think. I think that the very fastest movements we see, like in West Germany at the present moment, I think they are... I was going to say the cream and the cake. They're sort of the scum at the top of the water. There is a very, very great return to the right, and I think thrown off in the flurry of that are these extremely neo-Nazi, really, movements, But I think that deep down there is a very strong movement to the right in Europe itself, and I think that Yeltsin is in that direction more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where that would lead is anybody's guess. My feeling is that if Yeltsin did remain in power, and if the new apparent or the emerging configuration of this Commonwealth, Soviet Commonwealth, continues on and finally reaches its final form, and he's still at the helm and boss of all the Russias, as they say, with the button beneath his finger, that it would be extremely right. Whether it would go as far as classical fascism and Nazism is something else. But I think it's right-wing. But I think that's going to be elsewhere. I think one of the difficulties are going to come because, as you know, this new emerging Commonwealth, as we call it, the first thing that we are doing from the American side and the Europeans are doing is throwing down lines of amalgamation between the economy they hope to create in the former Soviet Empire and the EC, the European Community. And I think that we're going to have I think that's where the fall is going to come. Because frankly, between you and me and John, everybody is out for one thing and one thing only: gain, profit. There isn't one leader there who has an ounce of morality, real spirituality, real religion. It's hardball politics and gain and profit.
But there is a driving spiritual force behind this as well.
There is. It's being vehicled, I think. Listen, as a believer, as a fuddy-duddy believer, and you both know I'm very fuddy-duddy, as a fuddy-duddy believer in the providence of the Lord God who made us all, the God of salvation, I believe that it is vehicled on this present development, and that the development is going to fall into what Mikhail Gorbachev would call an abyss, and he knows all about abysses, by the way, and that eventually that providence of God will emerge. But I think we're going to go through the mill, as they say.
Is it
Much
likely
suffering.
that we'll see a return to the monarchs? Would that be something John Paul would favor?
No, I don't think he'd favor it, Kathleen, myself personally. I don't think he'd favor it. I don't think he would. He wants something far more, what would be the word, more extensive than monarchies. If he lets down his hair, what's left of it, and speaks as he thinks, he says, look, there is no salvation for any government existing today or for world government unless they actually act explicitly in the name of God. And that would require, a complete reform of mind. Can you see the whores in our Congress acting in the name of God explicitly? Or in the French Houses of Parliament? Or in the West German Parliament?
Well,
or the
he says
Italian...
that, and yet, why is it that the Holy See is contributing money, finances to this Earth Summit that's coming up in Rio de Janeiro in June, which is going to produce an Earth Charter that they say is going to be a document significant to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights?
I'll tell you, Kathleen, what I think. And here, of course, I'll get brickbats from my own people, but I'm used to the brickbats now. In fact, I live with them. Because the innards of the institutional organization of my Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church are corrupt. That's why.
But couldn't the Pope put an end to this? Couldn't the Pope say that we were not part of this?
His position is extremely delicate. Recently, a very, very well-known visitor who shall remain nameless had a private interview with him, and they argued about this point, and finally John Paul II stood up and put his arms straight down his sides and said, look, see me bound with chains. That's what I am at the present
Sort of a different prisoner of the Vatican is what you're saying.
Yeah, he is rather helpless, and he's doing his best to paddle back and forth. You see, there's one thing in John Paul II's character, if this is a red herring, stop me, but it's a point. His mentor and guide in his early days was probably the greatest cardinal that ever existed for 500 years in the Church of Rome, namely Stefan Wyszynski. Now, Stefan Wyszynski, his policy was this. He did not behave like Cardinal Mindszenty did in Hungary, who simply said no, went to prison, was tortured, was brainwashed, and lost out. He didn't imitate Cardinal Teen of China, who fled Shanghai and ended up eating chicken soup in Munich, and he died there. Wyszynski said, no, I'm going to stay here and engage these communists. And over a period, beginning about 1952 until 1980, a couple of years before he died, he successfully beat them at their own game. he actually finally was called on by the Stalinist government to help them survive. He did, by helping them to go under, really, because he had formed Solidarity and Solidarność, urban and rural. So his policy was to engage with the enemy, not to run, not to resist uselessly. And I think John Paul II has drawn this tactic that he's going to enter in as much as possible to these movements, hoping to remain intact. The problem, Kathleen, I see, whether you share it or not, is that the contamination and the infection from associating with this is too much, I think.
Yes.
Do you understand me?
Well,
I think it infects the body politic.
Yes.
And if I make my meaning clear, and I don't think at a certain point you can compromise and associate with those people, because they're going to absorb you and infect you spiritually and ideologically and humanly. So I don't like that policy of John Paul II's.
Right. The fact that you bring up Wyszynski is significant because in rereading your book again, you seem to hint throughout that book at different times that John Paul has a messianic role to play, or as Wyszynski says, you quote him as saying that Poland has a messianic role to play.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, I'll tell you frankly, it means this. It's not an opinion of mine. It's the condition of mind of John Paul II and of those who follow him. They are firmly convinced that in the area east of the Elbe, which includes Poland and Belarusia, White Russia, and Ukraine, that is the locus of some huge divine intervention in this decade. And that Poland has an archetypal role to play in that. What they don't know or they don't figure out exactly. Both eastwards and westwards. Eastwards as regards the Soviet Union, Russia, whatever we want to call it, and westwards as regards the European community. But they regard that is the place in which there's going to be huge events, world-dominating events, global events. That's the belief, anyway. They're firmly convinced of that, correctly or incorrectly. Okay. That's the idea behind it.
Okay.
And at the present moment, John and Kathleen, if you really are dispassionate and not violently pro the West, not violently pro the East, but have a decent stance, I can see no firmity, no solidity anywhere, either in Washington or Moscow or Minsk or Kiev or Bonn. Everything is up for grabs. Anything could happen.
Yes. One other thing.
Anything could happen.
You mentioned that John Paul, more or less, figuratively speaking, has his hands tied. So he is waiting then for this vision to occur.
That's right.
And the possibility that I wrote, or a scenario, and I presented it to Dr. Gruner, was that there could be a nuclear war of some kind, a limited war, perpetrated by Yeltsin or Russia or what is now called the Soviet republics, maybe involving the United States, and tremendous chaos all over the world, cosmic disturbances, and then the vision would occur.
Yeah, listen, that is quite a possible scenario. As I say, everything is so possible at the present moment. You see, look, my friends, let me ask you a question. If you were to say, suddenly, if some idiot was to say, let us liquidate the government of the United States, all its agencies throughout the states, all its overseas agencies, and let us make a new system, anybody sitting back who would say, okay, let's do that, but how long is it going to take? It'll take 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 years, you know what I mean? And the huge affair, the huge machine that ran the Soviet Union, what we used to call the party state, that has not been dismantled.
Right.
You can't do it physically. You understand me?
I understand.
So that's in place.
When we come back, there's only one other thing there's several things I'd like to chat with you for hours, but to go get to the consistory at some point, that chapter is very, very interesting to me, but I think John is chomping at the bit to say something.
Okay.
Well, we do have a break coming up, although we're not quite into the countdown to the break here.
Well, you have a right to chomp at the bit, John. You know, you are the boss.
Always reminds me of the horse I was riding this summer.
What happened to the horse?
He died. No.
John. Don't be morbid.
Okay, we're coming up on a break here. We're interviewing Malachi Martin, who is author of Keys of This Blood. I'm not going to recite the whole name of the book at this point.
No, do you need?
And we will be back in a minute. I am assuming, we have 45 seconds here, I'm assuming the Pope is waiting for the vision still, and I guess we'll address that when we get back here. I also would like to look at Earth Summit, and you happen to mention that you're on to executive orders, and we were talking about FEMA here a month ago on the program. We will be doing that again on Friday. So anyway, this is John Leffler with Kathleen Hayes and Malachi Martin, and Steel on Steel. We'll take it early out of the theme here, all right, Chris? We'll just do it. Bye-bye. We'll be back in a sec.
Denver's original KLTT.
Hey, this is Steel on Steel. We're back into it for the, I'd say the second half here. This always reminds me of a football game, to be really honest with you, because of the fact that we do that. I apologize if I sound what my wife called a semitone lower, or a semitone. It's actually a semitone, you know, because I have a wonderful code today. So there we are. This is Steel on Steel. We're talking with Dr. Malachi Martin, author of Keys of This Blood, and Jesuits in the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church. My guest interviewer is Kathleen Hayes. I will take 30 seconds. I don't want to cut off too much of the conversation today. This program needs support from you, our faithful listener, and I mean faithful because we have a real family out there of people that hang in onto this program. We're only keeping going right now based on your support, and that is not an exaggeration by a single penny. I really mean that. We appreciate those of you who have sent money into us already. We're hoping the program will become self-supporting by about, we'd say, 90 to 120 days. At that point, we plan on not asking for contributions anymore. I even hate to do that. I want you to know that what you get on the air is pure stuff, so to speak, that it's as truthful as we can make it. I'm not here to pull anybody's chain or push an agenda. We're simply here to get to the truth of many issues. My P.O. Box is P.O. Box 740-461, Arvada, Colorado 80006. P.O. Box 740-461, Arvada 80006. We've been told by many people who listen by way of our cassette sales elsewhere in the country, they wish they had a station on the air doing this type of material. Okay, back to Malachi Martin and Kathleen Hayes, and Kathleen's up with another question, and you take it, Kathleen.
Well, it's not so much a question, Malachi. I think it's important maybe for people who haven't heard you and I and John talk before on the Vision and Fatima. And where we differ is this. It's not that Fatima didn't happen. It did. And it's not that Lucy didn't see and hear an apparition on several occasions. She has. And it's not that the apparition didn't identify herself as the Mother of Christ. She did. The difference, and where we disagree, is the source of the event and the apparitions. Of course, the Catholic Church say they are of God, and I and other critics contend that they are not. And the second part of that would be that your contention and John Paul's contention that he has a mandate from God to govern the planet in so far as maybe spiritually or morally in this decade, and the source of that information. So my question to you, what if you are, and the Vatican, consummately wrong on these visions and the source of them? What will happen to many souls?
Oh, utter despair, Kathleen. Confusion, despair, and no hope. Do you understand me? No hope at all. Now, by the way, if I'm going to be utterly factual, the Church has never said, the Roman authorities, for instance, have never said, we guarantee the authenticity of everything that happened at Fatima or any detail of Fatima.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, they never did that. What they've done is they've given so many sanctions to the devotion springing from that event, do you know, that it's taken as an authentication. But if tomorrow it turned out to be a hoax, which I don't think it could, the Church would not have been compromised in its principles. It would have sanctioned practices without demur. You see, in several cases, since Fatima and before Fatima, Roman Church said, no, you can't touch that particular thing. And in these so-called apparitions in Medjugorje in Yugoslavia, what was Yugoslavia, the Church is very, very wary and cautious of them at the present moment. There's no sanction given by the official Church at all. in Rome. In fact, they've thrown cold water on it and said it's not supernatural, it's not divine. But in the case of Fatima, they've gone so far down the road that it's tantamount to an authentication without being it. Do you understand me?
Yes.
But that doesn't let them off the hook, but at least it's the official stance. Because they're cautious to the nth degree when it finally comes down to signing on the dotted line, the Romans are. Having waited for 2,000 years, they're going to wait a little bit longer. But if it did turn out to be that, then I can see nothing but hopelessness and despair and mass confusion of the worst kind and disruption of the social mentality in country after country after country.
Chris,
That's the answer to your question.
The hope that I would put in there, of course, is what the Scripture calls the blessed hope, which is the return of Jesus Christ.
Well, ultimately, that's what we all look for, John. That's what we all look for. However, we're assured by Scriptures that when he does come, it's the end of the whole shebang. Do you understand me? And I simply have a personal impression, it's purely subjective, I'd love to know what Kathleen thinks. I have an impression that God is not yet done with this world which he loved so much as to send his only Son into it. That we're not yet at the edge of the abyss. That there's still another phase, at least one more phase to go
that seems to be what part of the third secret revealed, or that
yes.
Supposedly the apparition said that in the end my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and then she will be converted, and then there'll be a period of peace that's given to the world, and then comes Armageddon, or the end. So what I was talking about earlier before the break in your chapter, the consistory, it seems, and this is just what I'm gleaning from it, that there will be some kind of a nuclear holocaust. There will be something dreadful happening, because you've said repeatedly that this vision has to come out of some kind of terrible misdirection in the world and chaos.
That's right.
So if there is even a limited nuclear war, the effects of that would be absolutely horrifying. And then it seems that John Paul in that chapter, or Valeska as you named the Pope there, is doing a major mea culpa.
That's right.
Would he then realize that because he didn't consecrate Russia, he is repenting?
That's right. He would finally have done what Paul VI would have done, and what John the 23rd should have done.
But by that time, we're talking that millions of lives could be gone.
Of course we are. And Kathleen, I must tell you that I do not see, personally, I do not see how we're going to escape a localized, which will be dreadful, a localized nuclear exchange somewhere along the line.
So you're putting yourself in the contrarian class with the rest of us, which is saying nuclear war, the danger of it is actually exacerbated or increased rather than decreased.
Yes, it has increased. Because as long as you had these two giants locked together with mailed fists on the button and vast interest overseas, they wouldn't let it happen. In fact, the Russians used always tell us privately, look, all that garbage about the nuclear threat from us, we know we'll go under with it. But now that the nuclear science, nuclear ability is accessible to small little republics and to an idiot or an evil man like Saddam Hussein, hey, I feel in my bones, I must say, I hate telling you this, that we can't get by without at least a localized nuclear exchange, which is going to trigger something terrible.
I think you're right.
Chernobyl is going to be slightly chicken feed compared to it.
Yeah, John Sajak was on the program here a week and a half ago. We did the whole show on Russia, and he analyzed the military state, and we are standing down our readiness in defense.
I know.
The new Russian Republic is not.
I know. And by the way, then, John and Kathleen, let me throw out one fact which always puzzles me. There are 10 cities in the Soviet Union which are not marked in any map. They contain a population of almost 1 million. Really, it's about 850,000. Nobody can leave there. People are born there and work there and die there. You can't leave without special permission. You can't find them on any map. They've never been on a map. They were created over the years as nuclear manufacturing arsenals. They're still there. They're still working. And, of course, it doesn't appear in the media. Now, all the intelligence services, ours and the French and the Mossad and the British, we all know about it.
You can't avoid it with spy satellites.
Yeah, but you can't get much of the details in it. You can get an awful lot. They're still there. They're still working. And the scenario I was drawing for you there before we went off the air for a break of how to dismantle a huge thing like the American government or the Soviet government. You don't dismantle that in 2 years.
No, not unless there is some kind of
physically, you can't do it.
an
you
attack.
Understand? So how to transfer all that holus bolus into a safe pair of hands?
What about this scenario? Okay, because part of the message to Lucy, the visionary, was that Russia would be the instrument of the heavens' chastisements of the world.
Right.
So let's go back to this scenario that I presenting to you and did to Dr. Gruner.
Yeah.
That if not the entire Soviet, what's left of it, sovereign republics, then certainly Russia launches an attack. It's blamed on some crazy Dr. Strangelove types, such as the coup, which was, ridiculous.
Yes.
And then there's the Pope does a mea culpa because he did not consecrate Russia to Mary.
Yeah.
And then who's ever left in the Russia goes to the Vatican, is forgiven. But by this time we have tremendous chaos everywhere. Then the vision comes, and that catapults John Paul as head of the planet in a spiritual, moral sense.
That is a feasible scenario.
But that would also frighten quite a few Protestants.
But it would frighten them out of their pants. The point is this, because they still have a hold of the old canard, that Rome itself is still looking for political control. Now, I don't for one moment discount the fact that amongst the cardinals, the 180 cardinals we have at the present moment, there are idiots who might have some idea like that. But officially, no. Because for one reason and one reason only, the most powerful faction amongst those cardinals at the present moment is completely in tow with the transnationals and submissive to them and serving them. It's one of John Paul II's great difficulties that he hasn't got a unified phalanx of his own men.
Okay, but Malachi, let's go back to that
Your scenario I like.
Okay, well, I think it's
I mean, I didn't like it, but I like it.
I understand. I don't like it either, but but my understanding is from your book and from other places where you've spoken that once John Paul does come and it's going to be in this decade very soon probably, as a moral spiritual judge, he will move the world toward Catholicism.
Well,
or the traditional Catholicism.
Well, I think that will depend on the mandate. If there is this huge intervention, if there is a revelation for all living men and women, when the good will get better and the weaker will get good and the bad will get badder or perish, I think that the directives will be given then. And who am I to say? I know that we Catholics, we fuddy-duddy Catholics, will go on as we're going. I do hope that the riches of Catholicism will open up to the eyes, even of those who at the present moment suspect us of the most nefarious designs and see Rome as the whore of the Mediterranean, the red woman of Babylon, all that business. But I don't want to inject a note there of triumphalism, Kathleen.
I understand.
I don't inject that. And then I do know this, that there must be some superior force, and I can only imagine God's force to be that force. There must be some superior force to eliminate, say, from the Russian Orthodox mind, the utter contempt they have for Catholics. And there must be some superior force, the same force, to eliminate from the Greek Orthodox mind the hate for Roman Catholicism. And there must be the same force that would dissolve the suspicion, the fear, and the hate that Protestant fundamentalists have for the Roman Catholic Church. And there must be some force, too, which will eliminate from Roman Catholics, especially the hierarchy, the ancient imperialism they acquired over 1,000 years.
Or what fundamentalists perceive as arrogance at times.
That's right.
Things. Okay.
That must be liquidated, but maintaining the purity of doctrine. And my friends, I only know one being who can do that, and that's the Prince of Peace, who arrived like a little baby in paradising our poverty with his smile.
Malachi, we're up for a break here again. It's interesting you should mention that. We have reports here now from reliable sources that track persecution that Russian Orthodox Catholics are persecuting Eastern Rite Roman Catholics within the Soviet Union now.
Look at Yugoslavia.
And etc. Okay, we're up for a break. This is Steel on Steel. John Leffler and Kathleen Hayes talking to Dr. Malachi Martin, and we will be back in a moment.
Steel on Steel, last section. John Leffler, Kathleen Hayes talking to Dr. Malachi Martin today. By the way, on Thursday, Dr. Anis Shorosh will be with us. Dr. Shorosh is a Palestinian Christian Arab who has been a Christian since the day of his birth. He is one of the leading apologists for the Christian faith in the face of Islam. Recently, one of the magazines that tracks Christian persecution said he was conducting a debate in South Africa, and a mob tried to kill him. They managed to get him out of there, out of wherever the hall was where they were debating, into a car, and one of the people with him was partially stabbed, but it was only a superficial wound. It was intended for Dr. Shorosh. Anyway, he will be with us on Thursday talking about Islam. He is thoroughly familiar with it, has debated some of the leading apologists of Islam. On Friday, Stuart Best will be back again, and he will be talking. We will kick off from FEMA and executive orders, and we will move forward from there and exactly how this plays a role in prophecy. On Monday, John Medina talking about the outer limits of life. How does a scientist look at when life actually begins? And that, of course, ties directly into issues such as abortion, etc., 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 as the King of Siam would say. So we go. Malachi, let's kick right off from that. You know, where we were, you were talking about Protestants, some of them viewing the Catholic Church as the whore of Babylon because, of course, there's a mention of 7 hills in the Scripture and blah, blah, blah. It's interesting that a lot of Christians in the fundamentalist and evangelical camps now are saying that we are actually the whore of Babylon, meaning the United States, that we are going to incur God's wrath for the
poor people.
The outrageous thing that we do.
If you only knew. I'll tell you what, John, let me register 2 things right now with you and Kathleen and your listeners. Man for man and woman for woman and child for child. Taking any other country on the face of this globe, I think we can match anybody personally in the overall aggregate of goodness and compassion and charity and hopefulness and general humanitarianism. That we have in our public consensus something else is one of our afflictions. But as a population, I don't think anything has yet destroyed the fundamental core of American goodness. I think our public consensus, as reflected in our public statements and in our government's actions, are lousy or awful. But the people themselves are intact, I think. And those who know us know that well. By the way, there's one more thing I think we should all say to ourselves, and I think to our listeners too. Look, in the last 3 years, isn't it the record of our daily fare on TV and radio and in media print that the world is full of surprises? We never know what's going to happen. This is going to continue. And let us not fool ourselves. We're not settling into a groove. We're going to be assaulted by surprises, some of them frightening, some of them chaotic, some of them terrible, from now on, for the rest of this decade. It's going to be surprise after surprise.
You know, I tell you what, let's talk about some... maybe I'm red herringing you. Excuse me, I'm dying here. Maybe I'm red herringing you. I can't use that as a verb, can you?
Of course not.
And we talk about the Protestant side, and I hate to use the word Protestant now because even that is just as diverse in other words, as it was before.
Of course.
When they look at Catholicism, they see a tremendous amount of arrogance from the church. In Father Gruner's book on Fatima, this rather thick book that he wrote, he still talks about the Protestant revolt. And of course, the Protestant response is, well, you know, Leo X wasn't exactly a paragon of virtue there.
That's right.
And they felt they were pulling the Reformation back to where it needed to go. And you even talked about Martin Luther in one of your books as being a neurotic monk. And I think there was a certain amount of neuroticism, but I can't exactly discharge the Catholic Church from having some role in creating that neuroticism.
No, I would not. No, I would not. No.
And I know that you can go to Seventh-day Adventist publications that I have seen come in here, and they're downright rabidly anti-Catholic to the point of absurdity in the other direction.
Sometimes it's laughable.
But I guess there are still documents around, and the great fear among Protestantism is that given the chance to form an amalgamated world government again, and on my fear, as I voiced to you a year ago, was that Pope John Paul II will put this into place, he will pass away, or he will be overtaken, or whatever.
Whatever.
And now we have a structure that now goes New Age or occult, which a lot of the church is moving.
Yeah.
And suddenly we now have the Office of the Inquisition in its old role again, but this time they're going to see whether or not you're liberal-minded or earth-minded or ecology-minded or whatever.
Well, John, I think you're dead on the ball. By the way, first of all, I think I feel I should agree with Paul VI, who in the last year of his life, 1978, told a great confidant, Jean Guiton, a French writer of his, that Catholics will form an infinitesimally small part of humanity for quite a while. And I think the Catholic Church is going to diminish down. That's that last chapter, Kathleen. I think that our ruin and our decadence is so great that we're going to lose all political, all financial, all social, all cultural influence. We're going to be marginalized totally by what is coming. And what is coming is not nice. It's Big Brother. And I don't like Big Brother at all. And there's no room there at all for any Roman imperialism or any Roman ambition. It's going to be eliminated. It is being eliminated at the present moment by corruption.
You know, it's... I have to hear that from you, because what I read indicates that the Rome that you described of the 14th century, the 15th, the 16th century is still alive and well back there in the mentality of the Italian thought, and I have to label it like that. I'm not anti-Italian by any means.
I know you're not, but it is. But I think it is there. Something is there, some remnant of it. But there's nothing of any potency, John and Kathleen. There's nothing of any force. They have no influence whatever. The only influence they have is when they piggyback on the vehicles created by the people who hate them and are going to liquidate them finally.
The other thing, though, Dr. Martin, realistically,
yes,
what will never bring the Orthodox, non-Christian, non-Catholic Christian, and the Roman Catholic together, that will never happen because, and this is my view, because of the Catholics, how they perceive Mary, and how the Orthodox, born-again Christians perceive Mary. That seems to be, number one, main stumbling block, and the second one, then, is the office, the person of the Pope.
Yeah, I know. Well, you see, Kathleen, I think that if our three counterparts were talking about this in 2050, they would look back and say, my goodness, look how all that has been transposed and changed, retaining the good that was everywhere, but eliminating the bad. I think that there's a miracle going to take place there. I think Our Lady, Mary, is the linchpin, the keystone of it. I think that she will bring about another form of Islam, another form in Islam itself, and that will deal with Islam through much blood and chaos, but it will be. That's why she chose Fatima, the hamlet named after Muhammad's eldest daughter, the only daughter he had. I think that the hardness of heart of Russians versus Catholics and vice versa, and of Greeks versus Catholics and vice versa, and of Protestants and Catholics vice versa, I think all that's going to be melted in a superior flow of grace, plus a bit of terrible human suffering. That's my belief and my hope.
See, I would say that the crucible is correct. What will pop out the back end are true Christians.
Yeah. Love.
And it may not be
the salvation by God.
Yeah, it will not be within any one denomination. I much as you know my own stance on Catholicism, at the same time I hate hearing things like you can't be Catholic and be saved simultaneously, looked at from a fundamental. I think that's just as much arrogance going back the other way as, as it is
as much.
coming out.
We're all at fault. And you know, the terrible thing is we are helpless in our faults. We can't get rid of it now. Only He can remove it. You know, we're lepers, and only He can say, be cured.
But maybe, of course, that's what we need in this country, is a good persecution.
Oh, we have it already in minor forms, and it's going to get greater. I think that anybody who wants to rear a family in a Christian way today, Catholic or Protestant, but a Christian way, is going to be heroic. Be heroic.
I can tell you that perspective as a public school teacher. And what I'm going through with my superintendent and school district for standing out on Christian issues is that the superintendent has a secret file on me, and I've been
I'm
questioned
not a bit
on my
surprised.
Christian activities.
I'm not a bit surprised, Kathleen, and you can generalize that throughout the country, because I remain in contact all over this country with people.
Now, let me ask. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They're suffering the same thing. There is a persecution already. It's steady, unremitting. It's regular, though, by rule, but they're enforcing the law, and the laws are unjust.
Okay, but a lot of that, say for example, I were to walk into a Catholic church around here and just begin chit-chatting with the people in the office staff, which I did happen to stop at a Catholic church yesterday to do something. If I were to begin telling them this, what we already know, what we've covered, we've done our homework, they would sit there with their mouths hanging open, and within about 2 minutes they would get the Looney Tunes look on their face, meaning this guy's way out. How are you? First of all, how are you received Catholics-wise? This has to be quick. And second of all, you do a lot of talk shows. How do the secular show hosts treat you?
I'll tell you. First of all, Catholic-wise, the general body of Catholics in the United States are uninformed and unseeing. They've been led by the nose now for 25 or 30 years by a very carefully planned mental brainwashing. Everywhere, though, you find people sitting up saying, yes, I know that's the truth. Why are we drifting the way we are, though? There's a small remnant of people, a small group of people everywhere who realize what is really happening and who are powerless to correct this drift. Now, with secular people, it splits two ways. Either they have come dead up against the concrete, harsh realities of life in the United States today and in this globalized world of ours, and they say, oh, what's the message? They want something. They want some hope. Or else they're completely unsatisfied materialists. You know what I mean? And they say, listen here, yeah, it's tough, yeah, well, we're okay, we're going to be okay. More people are eating today, and blah, blah, we're going to control the babies, and, you know, they're completely materialist.
Right.
And there's no in-between. There's no in-between. There's no real liberal mind today.
No one seems to comprehend what's really happening.
No, that's polarized, and we're not helped by what's thrown at us.
Right, Kathleen, 15 seconds for Kathleen here before we...
Dr. Martin, again, though we may agree on some things, we still are disagreeing on the vision, on the source of the vision, and I would say that I would not believe it to be necessarily good.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what I will do is this, and I'm not saying this jocosely, but I'm saying it pleasantly, and with great love for both of you. I'm going to ask Our Lady to inform us both and let us know, because she is finally the mother of the Redeemer.
And Kathleen would ask Jesus.
I will ask for Jesus.
All right. I mean, you can't find the son unless you find the mother. That's the old story. I won't tell you that funny story.
Malachi, we're out of time.
God bless you, John.
I saw that Barb come over. I need to talk to you after we get off the air here, too. This has been Steel on Steel.
Kathleen, bye-bye.
Daily program dedicated to the sharpening of ideas. We've been talking to Malachi Martin. My guest interviewer has been Kathleen R. Hayes from the National Research Institute. I'm John Leffler. Steel on Steel, copyright 1991, and the views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent those of the staff and management of this radio station or of Steel on Steel Productions. We need your help at P.O. Box 740-461, Arvada, Colorado, 1-800-829-5646. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Incredible allegations about Satanism with Inside the Vatican as far back as 1963. That and more about Windswept House. I'm John Leffler. This is Steel on Steel.
Steel on Steel. News, commentary, interview, and debate. An alternative information source for politics, religion, and global events. Now here's the host of Steel on Steel, John Leffler.
And welcome to Steel on Steel. We're a weekly program dedicated to the sharpening of ideas, news, commentary, interview, information, and debate, much of which you will not hear elsewhere. And if you have heard it elsewhere, we'll put a different spin on it. The goal of the program is to put an hour of solid news and information out there that is important to your life. We don't deal with fluff on this program. So when you tune into us, you hang on to our coattails and we roll away with it. A couple of weeks ago, we told you about the fact that the Most Reverend Emmanuel Milingo, formerly the Archbishop of Lucasa, Zambia, who now works in the Vatican as a special delegate to the Pontifical Council for the Pastoral Care of Immigrants and Itinerants, made an announcement at the Fatima Conference last fall in Rome to the effect that there is formal satanic activity going on in the Vatican. Not of the whole Vatican, but that there is a cadre of hierarchy there who are dedicated to satanic worship, formalized. There was allegedly some kind of a dedication ceremony which took place back in 1962. Now, what is interesting about this is the fact that, number one, the American press completely ignored this, and number two, the Italian press went berserk over it, and number three, there's a book out right now by Malachi Martin, his latest, the Vatican novel Windswept House. Now, Malachi does what are called factions. These are fictions which are basically portraying fact. And indeed, as I read through the book, and I read it intensely with a marker, it is amazing what he's actually telling you inside the book if you know how to sort of read the code words in there. Very much like if we read the works of Umberto Eco. A lot of the material he's given you is coded if you know what you're looking at and what you are reading. Now, in Windswept House, the whole novel starts with a ceremony which allegedly took place in the Vatican early in the 1960s, basically a satanic dedication of the Vatican to Lucifer as opposed to God. And from that time, of course, the novel maintains that everything in the Vatican ran on downhill. Malachi Martin is a well-known novelist. He's also a very eminent church historian. He's written a lot of factual books, histories, such as the Jesuits and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church. He has also written a book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Church. He has been at the Vatican. He was in one of the Vatican councils. He also did a lot of the preliminary translation work on the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're going to have a candid conversation in the second part of the show today with Malachi Martin about the direction of the Catholic Church. Understand that he's a controversial figure in his own right, but kicking off of that relationship. It seems like every once in a while things come together in pairs which are just absolutely amusing or wonderful. Sometimes the way people die is actually funny, even though we don't think of death as being a funny thing. In this case, about a week and a half ago, Congressman Ron Paul, whom, if you will remember, was reelected after being out of office for over a decade, made a statement. He said, "I fear, and there's a lot of people in this country who fear, that they may be bombed by the federal government at another Waco." He said this in response to a question about the federal investigation of recent bombings in Atlanta. He said, quote, "I mean, those people committed no crimes," end quote, referring to the people inside David Koresh's Branch Davidian compound near Waco. Now, these remarks really didn't jive with another congressman from Texas who represents the Waco area. This was Chet Edwards, and he's a Democrat. And in a very rare rebuke of a home state colleague, Edwards jumped to the floor to blast Ron Paul's comments, which he said were sheer lunacy at best. And, of course, this caused a big fracas and row as it went. The funny part of it is that there are a large number of people around the country who are concerned with that. And now in San Francisco, we've known this movie was coming out. We've been talking to the producers here at Steel on Steel. We've been talking to the producers for a couple of months now. There was a new movie called Rules of Engagement. It is a documentary being released into the theaters. And guess where they ran a test screening of it? In San Francisco. They wanted liberal feedback on this. Remember, so far, the whole Waco issue has been presented that basically the nuts deserve what was coming. Anybody who molests children should be lined up and shot. Indeed, I had a rather violent argument with a woman on the bus going to Boulder, Colorado one day from Denver about a year and a half ago over the same issue. She had said much of the same thing. The movie, which has now been produced, this is a documentary, uses government footage. And the liberals, more than half of them there, liberal or left-wing, were horrified at what they saw. One man said, "The FBI is never going to allow this film to go on to general release. There would be a revolution." One person objected that there were not enough interviews with the FBI and the BATF. According to the film reviewer, that's probably true. The film challenges the ATF claim that its agents were ambushed by the Davidians while trying to serve a search warrant, suggesting instead that the ATF launched the original assault with infantry and helicopters before there was any sign of resistance. Now, this congressman came out, Chet, what was his last name? I've lost it here. Anyway, he came out in opposing Ron Paul and said basically these people had committed all sorts of crimes, and he began to rattle off. He said the facts were that David Koresh raped a 10-year-old girl. We don't know that. There was testimony of that girl, now 14, but there's some question on that. Just a few months, he also quoted other facts as federal officials who went into that compound found 48 illegal machine guns and illegal hand grenades, etc., etc., etc. That's not true either. They barely found, I think, one, and I'm not sure whether it would qualify. There was so much information and misinformation and disinformation that was splattered about Waco, the whole thing became a hopeless morass. What is critical about Waco is the fact that there was a military action launched upon citizens of the United States. Posse comitatus prohibits this. The second tragedy is that because this did involve a religious group, that the churches of America on all sides did not see fit to demand an intensive and public investigation of what had happened, even if the federal government was 100% justified in doing what they did. The church instead chose to play politically correct and to not look like a kook and to say, well, those are kooks. We're not kooks. We're respectable people. It's not the way it works in this country, gang. And members in various churches should understand that if one person loses his or her rights, whether he's a liberal or conservative, the next time they come for someone, it may be for you. That was what Martin Niemöller said after World War II. First they came for the communists, and I wasn't a communist, so I didn't care. And he goes through the list of the people they came for, and he said, by the time they came for me, a Christian, there was nobody left to care. Waco is not finished. We have tried to keep us alert and awake on this program since the day it happened. It needs to be thoroughly and publicly investigated in such a way as all of the facts can come out. It's looking very carefully and very clearly that the federal government suppressed a large amount of evidence about what really happened at Waco. If a liberal comes out of a movie and says, this is horrible, you know we got something to worry about. Same thing happened to Randy Weaver. And I don't agree with the theologies of any of those people or what they stand for. But we do have a Constitution. Unless you stand up for it and I stand up for it, we're all in trouble. We'll be back. We're going to talk to Malachi Martin about his book, Windswept House. Candid Conversation. I'm John Leffer. This is Steel on Steel. Welcome back into Steel on Steel. It seems to be a standard way of re-entering the program. We're going to talk to Malachi Martin next here on the program about the Catholic Church and his latest book, Windswept House. Only I think it's going to be an interesting conversation rather than an interview, we'll do a conversation. How's that? Remember to support Steel on Steel. We need your prayers for provision and protection. Provision that God provide what we need here and in the way of food and income for people working on the program, and material resources to continue doing the program. Also, we ask you to take out a subscription to our program tapes, either the best tape of the month or all 52 tapes a year. There are two plans for that. One is $20, that's the 52 tapes, and the others is $7 for the best tape of the month. And if you would like to, you can call us at 1-800-829-5646. I'm not going to put any high pressure on you. This is what keeps us going here. 1-800-829-5646. And we will talk to you about a subscription. We don't bite, I promise. And the money we bring in on that, you get a tape with a copyright release. You can make copies of these programs, give them to friends. It's the full show. A lot of stations don't carry the full program every week. They just carry part of it. And you can make copies of those tapes, give them to friends. 1-800-829-5646. A gentleman we have had on the air before, and this is going to be an interesting discussion. I will not call it an interview because we pre-taped it. We were originally going to run it as an interview, and Dr. Martin and I wandered into a conversation and just kept going. Now, so you know who I'm talking about. We're talking about Dr. Malachi Martin. He's a former Jesuit priest. He was a close associate of Pope John the 23rd and Cardinal Augustin Bea. He's author of national best-selling books. The one that I liked very much was The Jesuits and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church. He has an earlier one, The Decline and Fall of the Catholic Church. His most recent book prior to this was The Keys of This Blood, which was not a novel, it was a history. He's an excellent Vatican historian. His latest one is what he would call a faction. It's called Windswept House. The plot starts with a satanic ritual occurring inside the Vatican. Now, according to sources, this actually happened back in the early 1960s, that a small cadre of cardinals and other ranking dignitaries, as a matter of fact, that was on June 29, 1963, conducted a ceremony called the Enthronement of the Fallen Angel Lucifer, effected within the Roman Catholic citadel. He says this in his faction, and he has affirmed the fact that it really did happen. Malachi also asserts the fact that 2 popes of this century have been poisoned, one being Pius XI and the other being Pope John Paul I. He is controversial in his own right, but his credentials are outstanding. He did some of the early translation work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, was a secretary during one of the conclaves, the one that elected Pope Paul VI, so he was inside the conclave and saw what went on, and has become a Vatican historian since that time. So we're approaching it from that point of view. And my first question as we started this discussion between the two of us was, I said, Malachi, was Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council, a good idea or a bad idea?
It was a bad idea, performed badly. You know what I mean? It really was. It was a bloody mess. And at the center of the mess was Paul VI. He was doing his best, but he wasn't destined for that. He was just shoveled into it by a cruel fate. And he lost his faith and regained part of it before he died. It was really a pathetic affair, very pathetic. And we're still far from recovering from the wound.
That was caused by that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We're still far from it. And John Paul II has done nothing. He just loves Vatican II.
You see, but the Protestant churches aren't much better off.
No, listen here, you're telling me. I was just going over yesterday over the pedophilia in the Greek church and the Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church,
right,
and in the Protestant churches. It's just as bad proportionately as we have in the Catholic Church. It's extraordinary.
Okay, my concern is, you would think that the driving force behind pedophilia would be celibacy. At least that would be the case that somebody would make, that this is there, and that because of celibacy, homosexuals would be attracted into the church, just like you mentioned in Windswept House.
Yes.
Given that circumstance, why would it be so predominant in the Orthodox Church?
Well, it's not that the Orthodox Church has a predominance of pedophilia. I think proportionately, they're just the same as us. Proportionately. Their married clergy hasn't saved them at all, either from that or from various other things. But proportionately, they're no more pedophiliac than we are in incidence. And similarly with the Protestant churches, there's something, John, something has broken down in organized Christianity. Something has broken down.
Across the board.
Across the board. They're all equally afflicted in the same way, too. It's extraordinary. It's really extraordinary. And the Catholic Church being a very big thing, of course, and having, 300,000, 400,000 nuns and about, in this country alone, 55,000 priests, plus 270 fellows who call themselves bishops, and worldwide having a couple of 100,000 priests, it's going to be more visible because there are more of us.
All right, now having said that, you have written, you have a lot of novels out there. You talk about web searching. I've been able to find gobs of stuff you've done.
Sure.
Along with your detractors.
Oh, yeah, my beloved enemies. Come on.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, don't take away my enemies from me, John.
You'd have nothing
Gee,
to
that's
fight.
terribly useful.
That would take out the fighting Irish spirit in you.
Besides
Right.
that, they make life interesting.
I think so. What has always distressed me on my call-in show was that I never had more people with opposing views call in. I enjoyed that more than, I enjoy
It's the spice of life.
the spice of life. But anyway, having said all of that, tomorrow there's a conclave, all right?
Okay.
And Pope Malachi the First is elected. I hope there wasn't another Malachi.
No, there wasn't.
All right. You're now Pope.
Uh-huh.
What would have to be done? You're stepping into the shoes of Pope John Paul II.
Well, what I would immediately do is I would reformulate, and edit all the basic 15 documents of Vatican II.
In council, in collegiality with bishops, or just do it unilaterally?
Myself.
As
with some theological experts who agree with me.
As Supreme Pontiff, in other words.
As Supreme Pontiff. Number one. Number two, I would arrange to spend a month in various countries, resident, and meet the people. But not everybody could meet me. I would restore the what you call it, not the unapproachability, but the remoteness of the papacy. Nobody would sit on the same level with me.
More like Pius XII, right?
They would kiss my ring and kiss my instep. By the way, talking about Pius XII, Pacelli Eugenio.
I was thinking, yeah.
He was elected, and when he was elected, of course, then he remained sitting on his throne, and all the other canopies were put up, and they all stood back, and they went up one by one to do their obeisance, which meant kissing his foot and kissing his instep and kissing his ring.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first up was the fiery Frenchman, Cardinal Tisserand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when he went on, then when you've done that, you go back to the back of the chapel and you wait for the others to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently Tisserand was heard to say, and he didn't think the Pope heard it, but he did, that they just elected the wrong man Pope. So when all the cardinals had done their obeisance, Pacelli called him up again and said to him, "You said this in the presence of 3 cardinals. Why did you say it?" So, of course, Tisserand apologized and says, "Holy Father, I'm sorry, it just came out of me like that. I'm a fiery Frenchman," etc. And Pacelli said, "Kiss it again." So he kissed the instep of the ring.
Well, I guess, Malachi, if it was your ring and your instep I was kissing, I could deal with that. There are other things that I couldn't deal with.
But then I go on from there. I would be awful. I would be awful. I really would be awful. I mean, I would fire, say, take the American bishops. I would fire 1/3 of them immediately. I mean, I'd terminate them.
I mean, put them out to retirement?
No, I'd tell them to leave. Just be gone on Monday.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't officially deconsecrate them. I mean...
No, but you can de-characterize them. You can simply reduce them to lay status. That's what I would do. And I would, things like that, I'd be very, very stiff altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd go to the major seminaries, firing right, left, and center. And I would reimpose the traditional Mass and get rid of the Novus Ordo immediately.
We're talking about with Latin as well, or just...
Oh, the whole thing, the whole shebang, yeah. The whole shebang. I mean, I would, and I'd wage an open war, short of murder, on anybody who opposed me. I simply would, I'd throw the hierarchy into turmoil. I'd have a food taster.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame you.
And I'd wear a bulletproof vest.
You'd be walking in the traditions of the Borgias, right?
I would. You tell them, listen, tradition of the Borgias, at least 2 popes were poisoned in our century alone. One in 1938 and one in 1978. Were poisoned, period.
You're talking about John Paul I?
Yeah, and I'm talking about Pius XI.
Why was he poisoned?
by Mussolini.
Was it related to Papal States issues, or?
No.
I didn't think so.
No, it was related to the fact that Pius the 11th wrote two documents, one against Hitler and one against Mussolini. The one against Hitler, Mit brennender Sorge, was published
in German.
They smuggled it into Germany overnight,
right?
And then one Sunday, from every pulpit in Germany, they read this damn letter. He nearly wrote Hitler to boils. Then he wrote one on Mussolini, and Mussolini decided that was that. He wasn't going to deliver it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That Mit brennender Sorge was the only encyclical ever written in German.
It's the only one I know.
Right.
And it's written in German precisely to be read from the pulpit.
Okay, Malachi, but having given all of that, is there really a probability that you would be elected Pope?
He had the choice.
I think I know where you are going, Malachi. We're talking to Dr. Malachi Martinwright today on Steel on Steel. This is a real candid conversation with him. He's author of the latest novel, Windswept House. He has authored a number of best-selling novels, such as Hostage to the Devil, about the subject of demonic possession. This came out quite some time ago. The Final Conclave is a novel. The Jesuits and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church is a factual history of the Jesuit order and its relationship to the Catholic Church. Keys of This Blood came out a few years ago and caused quite a stir. He's controversial in his own right. We're having a real candid conversation on the condition of the church today. In Windswept House, he makes the allegations that there were deliberate satanic rituals carried out inside the Vatican in 1963 on June 29th, the enthronement of the fallen archangel Lucifer. And this has been backed up by a bishop who is a prelate inside the Vatican who has likewise made that announcement as of last fall. So all of this, understanding that the latest book that Malachi has written is called, he calls it a faction, which means it's basically lots of facts are contained within a fictional novel, very much like Umberto Eco, who wrote The Name of the Rose, remember the movie with Sean Connery, and also Foucault's Pendulum. There's lots of coding in there. We have to say goodbye. I want to go into this because we're going to go into the subject of popes being poisoned in this century. I want to do that after the station break coming back. But anyway, we have to say goodbye to some of our radio stations right now. Please remember to support us if you would, first with prayer for provision and protection. Second of all, you can take out a subscription to our program at 1-800-829-5646. This program is available for $5 plus postage and handling. 1-800-829-5646. I'm John Leffler. This is Steel on Steel. Now joined the second half of Steel on Steel. For those of you just joining us, a great welcome. Thank you to those of you who were courageous enough to stay through the station break. We're talking to Dr. Malachi Martin today. He is a long-term novelist, was formerly a member of the Jesuit order, left that in the early 1960s, as a matter of fact, became a novelist and or documentarian of Vatican history. He's written a number of different books that are actual factual histories of the Catholic Church, going all the way back to some of the earliest times, and also a person who's put out many, many novels. Now, contrary to what you might think, he's still fairly devout in the area of traditional Roman Catholicism. That's what he's arguing for in most of his presentation of where he believes the Catholic Church has gone today. So just so the listeners understand the position where he's coming from and where I'm coming from on that. Now, Malachi, earlier as we run into the station break, you were talking about the issue of you being elected Pope, that this obviously didn't happen, that somebody other than John Paul could have been elected, that there were choices. Tell us more about that.
Instead of John Paul II, he had the choice of Cardinal Siri of Geneva, who would have done exactly what I would do. And he was elected Pope. He got the votes in the same conclave in October 1978. And he was told by a little handwritten note that if he accepted, he would die, and his family would die. So he refused the pontificate.
Could we expand on that? You wrote an interesting book many years ago called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Church.
That's right.
Is a lot of what has dominated Romanità, the whole way that the Vatican functions, the sort of philosophical air of the nonsense that has gone on in Italy and probably dates all the way back to the times of the Caesars, and we're talking about Augustus and I'm talking about a mentality now, from the people who brought you the mafia, in other words.
Yeah, it's a mentality. It's a mentality. And You see, I think that between in those cliche days, 400 to 1400, it served very well with the barbarians rushing all over Europe. And, I mean, think of what happened to the Lombards who invaded Italy. I mean, Pope Gregory the Great in 592 called them in public the noisome Lombards. They never watched, you know. And I mean, they became the leaders of the church. They became great saints, Charles Borromeo and all the rest of them. Not Ambrose, but he was a Roman. But they could deal with that, and then they could deal with the Middle Ages, the corruption of the whole thing, and still get through it, and they could create a culture. That was all fine and dandy, but I think, you see, it's all over, bar the shouting for this culture. It's dead from the neck up because it's been strangled with the Enlightenment, the Erklärung of the 1700s, and it's been strangled by the complete change in politics with the rise of America and the advent of democracy, as we call it, both in France and in America. And I think that Marxism was just a passing phase, 75-year long, just to drive a knife through the heart of Christianity, which used to be the East. It used to be the East. But it's been liquidated. There is no Christianity alive in Russia, not really as a culture, nor in Bulgaria, nor Romania, nor Czechoslovakia.
Isn't very much alive in Europe at this stage. I mean,
no, it's dead. It's dead, John. It really is dead, John. I mean, in Austria, supposedly Catholic Austria, 5% go to Mass once a year. 5%. And about 60% of all marriages after 2 children end up with sterilization, male or female.
Which, of course, is why there's some fertile ground for Protestant missionaries.
Of course there is.
Okay, because once you create a vacuum, all sorts of things will move in to fill that vacuum.
All sorts of sects get in there. But the vigorous, vibrant, evangelical, apostolic Romanism is dead. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, Johnny.
Just a shell.
It's a shell. And by the way, the shell, they're punching holes in it. It's, you know, it's going. And then increasingly, Christianity and Catholicism above all is a liability in the public square. Even in this country, the last decision of the Supreme Court, the Casey decision, for instance, they made it quite clear that anybody who starts thinking about public affairs in terms of any transcendental value is simply not welcome. It's not American. Because the law is completely now gone positivistic. It's legal positivism, and it's just positive. There's no room for Christianity, and certainly no room for Catholicism. And the idea now that Cardinal John O'Connor and the other 7 cardinals have written to Bill Clinton asking him to do something about the partial birth abortion. I mean, you know, between you and me and the wall, if the 7 cardinals and the 250 bishops and the 60 million Catholics took to the streets, they could stop this country. But they can't take to the streets any longer because they're no longer a community. And they have no place in American democracy except insofar as they renounce the principle of their Catholicism.
It's a figurehead thing. Yeah. And under the banner of tolerance or diversity, very much as in China today, Christianity is expected to toe the line of the prevailing political ethos of the day.
That's where we are. You see, if you revert to the year 120 or 130 AD, and if you landed at Alexandria and took your little shit back out of the hold and went along and said to the quidnuncs leaning against the wall with their caps shielding their eyes from the sun, where's the nearest Catholic church? They'd say, And then when you measure it clear, they say, well, look, go down there to the poor quarter, and I believe some slaves and fishermen and shipmen and sanitation men, they meet on Saturdays and Sundays, and they have a fellow, a priest or something like that, and they get letters. They have letters they read and things like that. Some people say they worship a donkey. Some people say they worship a god. And all those Christians, they refused to join the Roman army. That's what they were killed off.
Right.
They would not join it. They wouldn't join public events. Simply, they were underground, and they simply refused to have anything to do with this evil age, as they called it, until they became the bosses in 325. And they took over.
Was that good or bad?
I prefer to say, to avoid the question, say it was a necessary transition. There's a famous scene. The first pope, really, the pope that Constantine picked up from the ghetto and made boss of Rome was a fellow called Miltiades. He was a Berber. He was brown-skinned, but he couldn't do anything about it. The man who really took to the whole thing like a fish to water was Sylvester the First. Sylvester. He was a Roman, and Constantine said to him, "Look, you take the army, you take the judiciary, you take the taxes, and you're it. I'm going east to Byzantium, this little thing perched on the Dardanelles." And at that time, there still were physical descendants of Mary's family, and therefore of Jesus' family. And they were called the Despini, their special name. Despini means lords. And they were called the Despini because they were related to the Despinos being our Lord Jesus. And they came a delegation to Sylvester saying, "Look, now that we have freedom, now that the emperor has freed us all, come back to Jerusalem. That's where he lived and died. That's where he ascended into heaven. That's the holy city of the world." And Sylvester said, No, I am Bishop of Rome. And I have already a long line of bishops for 300 years. We stay here. And the church became Roman. And the last of the Despini then went back to the Middle East, and they died out. There must be today physical descendants. I'm sure the DNA was somehow...
Would pop out if you did it, yeah.
They say, yeah, but that was the final thrust. But they opted for the West.
No relation to the Copts, I'm assuming.
No.
I didn't think so.
No. That's a different branch completely. That's Eastern Semitic, Southeastern Semitic, and it's a different thing completely. They're related to the Arabians.
Dr. Malachi Martin's our guest today. Windswept House is his new novel, which has been out for some time. He's author of that, a best-selling author of other books such as The Jesuits and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church, Hostage to the Devil, The Keys of This Blood. We're talking about the church in general, having a very candid conversation today, rather than talking directly about the novel, which was one of those novels, by the way, I had to stay with. In other words, I kept writing it as much as I could. Reading it as rapidly as I could to get all the way through it. Copies of this program are available for $5, plus a little postage and shipping. Don't forget, we need your prayers and protection and provision to keep going. And also, if you would, you can take out a subscription. We have the Best Of tape every month for $7, the best of each month. We send you one tape a month, and that helps us keep the show going. 1-800-829-5646. 1-800-829-5646. We'll be back. I'm John Leffler, and this is Steel on Steel. Last part of Steel on Steel today, our interview with Dr. Malachi Martin. This is really more of a candid conversation. We were going to talk about his book, Windswept House, but I think it sort of slid into other topics of conversation about the history of the Catholic Church in this century. He's written a number of books about the history of the Church. He was present at the conclave which elected Pope Paul VI. This was in 1962, I believe. That's right, 62. He was inside the conclave as an assistant there. Did much of the translation work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the early on translation, and has a long history, was a confidant of John the 23rd, things of that nature. So it is interesting to see that, and we will follow this line of thought for the rest of this program. Next week, we will probably run back to the issue of things that are going on in the world around you that you need to hear about. Let me ask a question. You're both, obviously you came from Ireland, but you're very much American and patriotic in your outlook, I think.
Absolutely.
I understand your concern for Catholicism. What I think, I'm just going to preface it, then I have to ask the question.
Yeah.
But the preface that I've heard a lot of Protestants say when they hear your interviews or read your books is, how can you write as much as you do about the Catholic Church and still stand where you do on it? Now, just putting that question aside is, given the fact there will probably be no Pope Malachi the First,
that's right,
or last,
that's right, or middle,
or middle, where will we now be? I don't mean just in Catholicism, I mean in Protestantism and in Christianity as a whole, given this massive thrust to what I would call an agnostic or atheistic, actually it's a monistic, pantheistic socialism is what the world is moving toward right now.
It is, and it's official. It's official. It just remains for China to be taken into this hegemony, and the thing is completed, and then we have trouble. I think that we're all going to be marginalized, true believers. And I think that marginalization is going to produce a great homogeneity for us all. And I think that the Lord Jesus will communicate his Spirit to us and make us into one church. I think it's a short process, though, John. I don't think it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, we're not talking about a couple of centuries to evolve
No,
a new.
I think we're talking about maximum 2 decades. I think it's going as fast as that. And the old what do you call it, internecine warfare is going to simply fail to be. Hold on a moment.
Go ahead.
I'll be with you in a moment.
Do it.
But there are two members of the family who've been traveling. But I think the Lord Jesus, that's going to be his advent. I think he's going to do that. It won't be his final appearance, but I think that's what he's going to do. He's going to give us the grace if we believe. And suddenly I'll find that the evangelicals and I, and the Greeks and I, and the Russians and I, and the Copts and I, and a whole sprinkling of Protestant churches and sects feel the same about the Lord Jesus, feel the same about the Virgin, feel the same about hell, heaven, and purgatory. We are co-believers, you know?
But of course, that's going to be a time of trial.
Oh, I think we'll be in the underground.
That's what I mean.
No, that's what will drive us together. John,
yeah.
I have to probably break off any moment now. Do you mind, or will you be offended?
No, I wouldn't be offended. Do me a favor.
Sure.
2 things before you go. I think we have enough. I can cut that into a show pretty easily.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you where the Catholic Church is going to be in that one.
It's going to be. What we will have will be the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church of our Lord Jesus.
You're talking about the underground. I'm talking about the framework of Rome right now.
The framework of Rome, that's going to be transmuted. At the present moment, it is in apostasy, John, between you and me and the Holy Spirit.
Right.
It is in apostasy.
But
it's in apostasy, John. It's run by apostates.
That's what I'm saying. But it will have the shell and appearance of what was formerly the Catholic Church. This is what I've maintained all along.
It will, but there's going to be a vast change.
And it will be a religio-political...
Yes, it will.
Okay.
But it'll be a vast change, though. It will lack all imperialism.
Yeah, but I would think... You see, I have the other book I have next to me here right now is The Great Evangelical Disaster by Francis Schaeffer.
Oh, yes.
What I see in the FEP side of the equation, that means fundamental evangelical Pentecostal, what I see there is the fact that they have no rooting. That starting around the turn of the century with the degeneration of education, the introduction of what we call anti-intellectualism, especially among Pentecostal churches.
That's right.
They completely chopped themselves off from any concept, and I hate to use the word of tradition, but of what we would say continuity between the church theology, Protestant or Catholic, from the past. Right. And now they're flopping around pretty badly. They just don't know it. And they've substituted... churches which have wonderful worship ceremonies on Sunday. They look more like a television studio than they do a church.
Sure do. But it's not remedying the situation at all. It may be, John. It may be a simple thing as this. It may be that because you see Christianity or the Christians between the year 400 as a cliche date and the year 1408 is the other cliche date, in that time they created a new civilization for themselves. and that flowered into the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and all the rest of it, and science, scientific inquiry, etc., and the travel abroad, etc. But they did found this civilization. Well, I think that civilization is now moribund. And since it is, the cultural basis of Christianity, Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox, has been sapped. And they simply, it shows how dependent a viable Christianity was on that culture. And it's just too bad. The culture is gone, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you know, but see, on the other hand, the church itself, I always accuse my Jewish friends of what I call ghetto mentality. I say the reason you have trouble interacting here is because due to survival patterns of the last 1,000 years, you still create mental ghettos around yourself. You understand nothing of the outside. You know, and that's an open critique. That's not anti-Semitic. That's actually a positive critique, believe it or not.
No, they would accept. They would allow you to do that. But
Right.
They would find that objectionable. So many of them would agree with you.
But having said that, if you look at the Christian milieu, and I don't see it interacting with its culture. In other words, they don't understand. Number one, okay, if you go into a Catholic church, first of all, in most Catholic churches, I wouldn't raise my kids anyway, and I'm not even dealing with the theological arguments.
No, I wouldn't.
I was dealing with the glop I saw being introduced into catechetics 20 years ago.
Yeah, and it's still being processed as glop.
Right.
When I say the culture is failing, it is that the things that culture gave us for worshipping, like genuflection, kneeling, fasting,
Bowing and all the other nonsense.
praying, reverence, marriage, position of women, that's all gone in our culture today, and it's increasingly more gone according as each 5 years passes, because the American bubble, such as it is, as they call it, wherever it spreads, these things are liquidated.
Right.
And I think that without the culture, I think the religion is going underground to refurbish itself and find new forms, because this form no longer suits it. Just simply no longer suits it.
That's sort of a good analysis, because what happened is the church left behind. It was reliant upon the culture. The culture changed. The church either ghettoized itself into its own little walled-in area, or it tried to adapt itself into the culture. But either way, and by adapting, I don't mean interacting and being salt and light. I meant becoming like the culture.
Exactly.
Okay,
Adapting to it in such a way that it took on, it became the culture.
Right, there's no difference, you know. And you look at the extreme, say the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, where you live in New York City. It's a center for occultic and New Age activity.
Sure is.
Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, what's the diff? You know?
Sure is.
Dr. Malachi Martin, author of Windswept House, a novel about the Vatican starting in about 1960 and going all the way through the current time. And of course, in the Vatican today, there was much talk about the successor pope. I think Pope John Paul II is being viewed as a lame duck in terms of Vatican politics. The most astounding thing that Dr. Martin has alluded to in this book was the carrying out of a dedication called the Enthronement of the Fallen Angel Lucifer, effected within inside the Roman Catholic Vatican Citadel on June 29th, 1963. And he had alluded to this in his book earlier called The Keys of This Blood, when there were rumors to that effect. Now he says the confirmation of the event is pretty much there. And recently, Archbishop Malingo, who is a Vatican prelate, came out and made the same statement at a conference in Italy last fall. And this caused quite a buzz in the Italian press. It didn't do much in the press in this country or in Canada or any other locations like that. So that we are concerned with that. Speaking of concern, you might look overseas. Libya is stepping up construction work on the largest chemical weapons plant in the world in defiance of American threats to bomb the facility. It's located in the mountains about 60 miles south of Tripoli and is capable of producing tremendous amounts of nerve gas, probably by the end of the year. It's also been hardened against air attack. Conventional air attack is virtually impossible. Russia, we will talk in the future on this program about the upcoming situation of Nazism in Russia. I kid you not. There is a viable Nazi party now in the former Soviet Union. And the question is, where will that country go, especially if Alexander Lebed has his way? In this country, of course, we're looking at several different bills to ostensibly reform the tax system. You're being told that flat tax is probably the best way out of that. That's horsepucky, simply because of the fact that just imposing a flat tax does not reduce all of the massive compliance burden and paperwork that is required, that is really lugging down much of the economy. Finally, don't forget that Hong Kong's 500,000 Christians feel far more anxiety about their future because of the fact that they are going back under China. China has stepped up persecution. Inside mainland China, the underground church has a harder time. Pray for your brothers and sisters there and in Vietnam. We'll be back next week. Pray for us. I'm John Leffler. This is Steel on Steel.
This has been Steel on Steel with John Leffler, an alternative information source for politics, religion, and global events. Program producer is Carol Leffler. Engineer, Mark Wright. Research, Kristen Hoppy. Program distribution, Kirk Peterson. And this is James Clubb. The views and opinions expressed on this broadcast are not necessarily those of the staff, management, owners, or advertisers of this radio station. A $20 per month subscription to Steel on Steel supports the ongoing production of the broadcast. For more information, call toll-free 1-800-829-5646. That's 1-800-829-5646. This is IRN, the Information Radio Network.